Malik Johnson walked into the admissions office with the grades, the trophies, and the dream his whole neighborhood believed in, only to be handed a rejection letter with 3 words, scribbled on the back, "Not our kind." His mother's hands trembled as she turned the page and found a second hidden note, one that revealed a truth darker than rejection itself. But what she read wasn't just about Malik, it was about every black student who never stood a chance. And the question is, who dared to write it? Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The house was unnervingly quiet that late afternoon. Outside, the winter sun slanted across the Johnson family's narrow porch, coating it in a tired amber light that made everything look heavier than it was. Inside, Malik Johnson sat at the kitchen table, his laptop open, but his hands motionless on the keyboard. His eyes kept darting to the white envelope lying across from him. The return address, bold, serif letters from Eldridge University, seemed to glow with unbearable significance. For weeks Malik had rehearsed this moment. He had imagined peeling open the envelope and reading the words he had worked his entire young life to earn. Congratulations. He had dreamed of his mother's tears, his neighbors' cheers, the pride of knowing his late grandmother's sacrifices had not been in vain. He had built his whole senior year around this letter. Now it was here, and he could barely breathe. Denise Johnson stood by the counter, drying her hands on a dish towel she had wrung out 3 times already. She had worked a 14-hour shift at the hospital the night before, but she refused to miss this moment. Her son was supposed to be the first in their family to walk onto the campus of one of America's most elite colleges. She had worked night after night, double shifts saving what she could, watching him study past midnight under the glow of the old kitchen lamp. "Go on, baby," she whispered, her voice trembling more than she intended. Malik picked up the envelope. The paper was heavier than ordinary mail, thick enough to carry either a future or a disappointment. His fingers shook as he slid one edge under the flap, tearing it open carefully, like a surgeon trying not to damage what lay inside. He pulled out the letter and unfolded it. The words leapt at him immediately. "We regret to inform you." He read them once, then again, as though repetition would somehow alter the reality. His mouth went dry. The rest of the letter was formal, perfunctory. Phrases like competitive pool of applicants and difficult decisions blurred together into static noise. It was cold, clinical. Not a single line about his accomplishments, not even the pretense of encouragement, just rejection. Malik felt his stomach plummet as though the ground beneath the kitchen chair had collapsed. Denise stepped closer, her heart pounding. What does it say?" Malik swallowed hard, his voice barely audible. "They said no." The towel dropped from Denise's hands. For a moment the world went still. She had spent years telling herself that if Malik kept his grades spotless, if he joined enough clubs, if he stayed out of trouble, then no institution could deny him his rightful place. Now that belief cracked. Her son wasn't just qualified, he was extraordinary. He had a 4.2 GPA, had led his robotics team to national semifinals, and served as debate captain, demolishing opponents with a calm intelligence that left judges stunned. Teachers whispered about him as the kind of student who came once in a generation. His principal had personally called Eldridge to recommend him. And yet here he sat, shoulders collapsing inward, holding a letter that treated all of that as invisible. Malik forced himself to keep reading, searching for some rational explanation. But there was none. The letter was as cold as marble, its sentences sharp enough to cut. Denise pulled out a chair and sat beside him, her hand reaching for his, but Malik pulled back slightly. Not out of anger, but because his body felt too raw to be touched. He blinked rapidly, trying to push down the sting in his eyes. Crying, he thought, would make it worse. "They didn't even explain," he murmured. Denise leaned closer. "That doesn't make sense. They know who you are. They know what you've done." But Malik wasn't sure they ever had. In classrooms, he had grown accustomed to proving himself twice over, before anyone believed he was as capable as his peers. At debate tournaments, he had seen judges glance skeptically at him, until he opened his mouth. Even at robotics competitions, there were whispers when he took the stage. "The black kid, he's the leader." Still, he had trusted the numbers. He had trusted the essays, the recommendations, the sheer undeniability of his record. He had believed, perhaps naively, that merit would eclipse bias. And yet here was the truth in his hands. It hadn't. The minutes stretched, heavy and suffocating. Denise finally stood, pacing the small kitchen, her thoughts racing faster than her feet. No, no, something isn't right. They don't just. She stopped herself, trying not to unravel in front of him. We'll figure this out. Malik's eyes dropped to the letter again. The words felt deliberately stripped of humanity, like they had been written not for him but for some generic placeholder. He noticed for the first time how the paragraphs were shorter than in other acceptance letters he had seen online, as if they had decided quickly and without much thought. He folded the letter back into the envelope, sliding it across the table. Maybe I wasn't what they wanted, he said, the bitterness quiet but sharp. Denise turned, her voice suddenly firm. Don't you say that. Don't you ever think you weren't good enough. You've given more than anyone could ask. If they don't see that, then something else is going on. She lifted the envelope, frowning. The glue on the flap hadn't been pressed evenly. Part of it seemed rushed, almost careless. As she adjusted it in her hand, a thin slip of paper fluttered loose, falling to the floor. Malik noticed it first. What's that? Denise bent down and picked it up. It wasn't part of the official letter, just a small square folded in half. She opened it, her breath catching as her eyes scanned the words scrawled in hurried ink. Her hand trembled. Oh my God. Malik's heart thudded. What is it? Denise looked at him, her face pale, the paper crinkling in her tightening fist. The note was brief, but its message was unmistakable.
This changes everything, she whispered, her voice hollow with shock.
And before Malik could press her further, before he could even read the words himself, Denise clutched the note to her chest, knowing that whatever truth it carried was about to crack their world open in ways neither of them were prepared for. Denise didn't move for a moment after the counselor's words landed. The hallway outside the guidance office rang with the second period bell, lockers clanging like metal thunder, student voices rising and falling in a chorus that made the building feel alive and indifferent at once. Inside, the air seemed to shrink around her. Warned by whom, she asked, voice low. Miss Garrison's pen hovered above a legal pad. I can't say more, she murmured. I shouldn't have said anything. Her eyes flicked toward the door. Please understand. These processes are complicated. Conversations happen. Conversations that decide futures. Denise said. My son's future. No answer came. Only the thin sound of the wall clock. Denise stood, forcing her voice steady. If there's anything you're not telling me, remember there's a mother on the other side of it. She left before the silence could swallow her resolve. In the hallway, she pulled out her phone and typed a message to Malik. We'll talk after school. Keep your head up. She didn't add the other words pressing at her fingers. Be careful. Someone talked. She tucked the phone away and walked out past the college pennants tacked over the main doors. The bright colors suddenly gaudy. Malik read the text between classes and forced his face neutral. He could feel eyes on him in the locker bay. Curious, pitying, hungry. News at East Hollow High traveled better than the announcement system, and his rejection had already made its rounds. He pretended to study the scuffed floor tiles while the chatter grew like static climbing the walls, getting into his ears. Did you hear? Eldenridge said no. A voice he recognized, Paige from AP Lit, half-whispered, half-exhaled the words. A boy replied, too loud, faking sympathy. Crazy. I figured they'd want the optics. Another voice cut in, lower, cruel in its casualness. They weren't going to let someone like him in. Not really. Malik's hands tightened on his backpack straps. He didn't turn. He watched the hallway clock and waited for it to be time for debate, where at least the rules for being heard were written down. At the end of the corridor, his debate coach, Mr. Hargrove, stepped out of his classroom as Malik approached. Got a minute? He asked, voice gentle. Malik nodded. Inside, the room smelled like dry erase markers and old paper trophies. The coach leaned against a desk, searching Malik's face. I heard about Eldenridge. I'm sorry. It's fine, Malik said too quickly. It's not, Hargrove said. Admissions officers get it wrong. They're human. They latch on to the wrong details. He paused. If you want to appeal, there's a process. We can submit an additional recommendation. I'll write it today. Malik wanted to let those words be a rope thrown into water. He wanted to grab it and pull. Thanks, he said. I don't know if it's that simple. Hargrove studied him. Something else going on. A hesitation. A flash of the word Denise had used last night. Outspoken. Just noise, Malik said. People talking. They will, Hargrove said. Let them tire themselves out. You stay the course. He gripped the back of a chair, knuckles whitening. You're the kind of student colleges fear because you make their comfort look small. That's not your problem. Malik held the words like a heat pack in winter. Appreciate it. In calculus, the lights buzzed softly overhead as Ms. Levin handed back tests. Malik's paper was face down, a neat 98 penned at the top when he flipped it. For a second, the number steadied him. At this level, Ms. Levin said as she moved through the rows, you all know colleges look at more than numbers. She stopped by Malik's desk, voice bright enough to carry. Holistic review is a good thing. Grades aren't everything. He looked up at her. No one said they were. Ms. Levin smiled. All teeth. Oh, I only mean schools seek community contributors. People who fit what they're building. It's not a judgment. It's alignment. He met her eyes and felt the skin between his shoulders tighten. Alignment. Culture. He remembered how weeks ago, she'd reassured another student who'd gotten into a top-tier college with a middling GPA by saying, they loved your vibe. He wondered what they had loved less about his. At the end of class, when students fanned toward the door, Ms. Levin said quietly as he passed, make sure your essays for other schools show resilience, rather than confrontation. That tone matters. He turned. Confrontation? Just a thought, she said, moving to erase the board. There's a line between assertive and combative that reads differently depending on context. Admissions sees a lot. Depending on context, he echoed. He walked out before he said anything else. Near the science wing, he slowed when he heard voices through a cracked faculty lounge door. He should have kept walking. He didn't. I hate how this is spiraling, a woman said. Miss Klein, robotics advisor. He's exceptional. The denial feels wrong. The numbers this year were brutal. Another voice replied. Mr. Davison from history. Eldenridge accepts. What? 5%? We can't assume bias every time a high-achieving kid gets a no. I'm not assuming, Klein said. I'm looking at patterns. Which kids get told they're a fit? Which kids get told they'd be better off somewhere else? Careful, Davison murmured. We don't know what their committee saw. A third voice, Ms. Levin, lowered. Sometimes outside impressions sway those committees. No one wants a headline. Outside impressions, Klein pressed. Silence. Then Davison again. We should stick to helping him with next steps. Malik backed away, pulse in his throat. He almost bumped into a freshman who squeaked an apology. My bad, Malik said, managing a smile, then kept walking as though the ground were a treadmill, relentless, unyielding. By lunch his phone wouldn't stay still. Group chats bloomed and buzzed. Robotics fam, debate wolves, senior memes, East Hollow confessions, screenshots of a tweet from a local alum who'd announced merit should matter more than identity politics, followed by threads defending Malik, then threads undermining him, then threads insisting they were just asking questions. A student he'd barely spoken to wrote in a public post, he just rubs people the wrong way. Another added, he's always trying to make everything about race. The comments festered, liked and argued over, while friends tried to tamp down the fire. Noah, his second in command in robotics, slid onto the cafeteria bench across from him and set down a tray of fries. I've been reporting stuff all morning, he said breathless. People are gross, man. Zara from debate dropped beside Malik. Her braid coiled at the nape of her neck, her jaw tight. Say the word and we'll make a statement, she said. We can talk about bias without naming the college, or we can name them. I don't care. I'm not trying to explode my life, Malik said, though part of him wanted precisely that. The kind of explosion that forced people to pick up pieces and look at them closely. He scanned the room, aware of how tables seemed to reorient themselves around him, either turning toward him or turning carefully away. Zara's gaze softened. What do you want? He thought of the letter. He thought of the note his mother hadn't shown him, but had shown in the small isometric shifts of her body, her posture, her breath. I want the truth, he said, and I want them to say it out loud. Noah nodded. Then we start collecting receipts. Document everything. Across the room, someone snickered loud enough to be heard 3 tables over. He only got that far because they wanted to look diverse, a boy said. Now they're done pretending. Zara's fingers curled around the edge of the table. You hear that? I hear it, Malik said. He picked up his milk carton, set it down again. I'm not giving them the performance they want. Zara tipped her chin. Then give them silence that scares them. He almost smiled. 5th period came and went. A blur of notes he would have understood on any other day. In physics, the gunmetal rain began. tapping the windows like urgent knuckles. Mr. Patel, who ran the engineering club, stopped Malik on the way out. "If you need a recommendation to any program, I'll write until my hand falls off," he said. "I've got data on your build logs that would make any dean sit up straight." "Thank you," Malik said. Mr. Patel tugged at his tie. "Uneasy. Keep everything," he added. "Emails, comments, anything said in meetings. Bias hides best when it stays anecdotal." The words folded into him, heavy and useful. Between 6th and 7th period, his phone lit with a new DM request from an account with no name and a default avatar. "Check your school email at 3:15. Subject line committee deliberations. Delete this message after reading." Malik's thumb hovered. He looked around instinctively, as if he might catch someone watching him through the slats of the lockers. He typed back, "Who is this?" No reply. The message vanished, deleted by the sender. He swallowed, the back of his neck prickling. The day stretched like a wire about to snap. In English, students were reading Baldwin, and Miss Ortega asked how the narrator balanced rage and restraint. "He tells the truth without begging," a girl said. Malik stared at the page, the words blurring, and thought, "Tell the truth. Don't beg." At 3:04 he waited outside the robotics lab, with Noah, who talked fast about a microcontroller supplier who had shorted them. The kind of problem Malik usually loved to untangle. Today the details drifted past him like smoke. Noah stopped mid-sentence. "You're not hearing a word I'm saying." "I'm hearing you," Malik said, then sighed. "I got a weird message." "Weird how?" "Anonymous. Told me to check my email at Noah's eyebrows shot up. "That's either a trap or a gift." Zara appeared at the end of the hall, her steps quick. "They're dragging your name on confessions again," she said. "One of the posts says a teacher told Eldenridge you had a discipline problem. That's a lie, but it's getting likes." Malik's head snapped up. "A teacher? Rumor," she said. "You know how this place works." He thought of Miss Garrison's office, the window blinds half drawn as if hiding guilt from sunlight. He thought of Miss Levin's careful words. His fingers tingled. Zara studied him. "Hey, whatever you learn, you don't have to carry it alone." He nodded once. The final bell released the day, and the building exhaled. Students flooded the stairwells, backpacks thudded, laughter spiked. The usual choreography of dismissal resumed. Malik stepped into an empty computer pod, near the library, one of those little glassed-in rectangles, with a humming desktop and a view of the courtyard. The rain beaded on the window, stippling the world with silver. He logged into his school email. 3 new messages blinked back at him. PTA newsletter, a scholarship reminder, and one with no sender name, just a timestamp of 3:15. His pulse ratcheted up. Subject line committee deliberations. Eldenridge AB admissions. Confidential. He clicked. For a second nothing loaded. Then the body of the message appeared, short, unsentimental, like a hand slipping something into his pocket without meeting his eye. "You don't know me. You don't need to. But you deserve to see what they said. Protect yourself. Delete, after reading." A link followed. Attachment, Round 1 evaluations MJ. Malik stared at it, breath shallow. In the reflection on the glass, he saw his own face, calm, but not calm, a still surface over deep water. With the mouse he hovered over the file name. His finger tightened. Footsteps passed outside the pod. Through the glass he saw Mr. Hargrove walk by, then pause and glance in as if sensing something coiled in the air. Malik lifted a hand. "Wait," and the coach nodded, moving on. He double-clicked the attachment. A PDF opened. Black text on white, letterhead crest at the top. Eldenridge University, Admissions Committee, Preliminary Review. Then a table. Name, school, academics, leadership, notes. He scanned for his own line and found it instantly. The letters of his name too small for the space they needed to occupy. Under notes the first sentence sliced clean. Cultural fit concerns, flagged as activism risk. The second line tightened, almost clinical. HS source indicated pattern of confrontational behavior. Recommend deny to avoid future trouble. Then a date, then 2 initials he didn't recognize. And at the right edge, half cut by the scan, a phrase that punched through every wall he'd built all day. Warning call logged. The rest of the name was truncated by the page break. He scrolled with a shaking hand, the screen shifting to reveal the next line. Just as the computer hiccuped and the document flashed, the cursor pinwheeling. And before the missing name resolved, the window grayed out, and a new message bloomed across the screen. Stark and sudden. This file has been revoked by the owner. The attachment vanished from the inbox. Malik froze, the chair creaking beneath him. In the glass he saw his own reflection soak with a new, cold knowledge. Someone inside the building had access to the admissions board's internal notes. Someone had tried to show him. Someone else had just tried to make sure he never saw it again. He reached for his phone, heart hammering, to call the only person who might know where to look next. Outside the pod, the hallway lights flickered once-twice, as if the building itself were holding its breath. Then his screen buzzed with a single unknown number and a text that made the hair rise at the back of his neck. If you want the full document, meet me at the auditorium back door in 10 minutes. Come alone. Denise stood frozen in the small kitchen, the crumpled slip of paper pressed against her palm, as though it might burn through her skin. Malik leaned forward from the table, searching her face, but she didn't let him see it. Not yet. The weight of the words written there was too sharp, too jagged to spill out all at once. The silence stretched, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator. Finally, she slipped the note into her apron pocket and forced her voice into something steadier than she felt. Not now, she said. We'll talk later. Malik's brow furrowed, frustration mingling with confusion. Mom, if it's about me, I deserve to know. Her eyes softened. He was right. He always was. But Denise wasn't ready to tell him, not until she could make sense of it herself. Instead, she reached across the table and clasped his hand firmly, grounding herself in the warmth of his skin. You've worked too hard for this, she whispered. Whatever that school thinks, you're not done. Not by a long shot. Malik stared at her, shoulders tight. He wanted answers, but something in her tone told him to wait. That night, after Malik had retreated to his room, Denise sat on the living room couch, with the lights off, the small slip of paper unfolded in her lap. The handwriting was jagged, hurried, almost as if someone had written it in secret. It read, not a fit for their culture, too outspoken. Better to avoid trouble. Denise's throat closed. It wasn't official. It wasn't signed, but it said everything she had feared. Her son had been rejected not because of grades, or test scores, or qualifications. He had been rejected because of who he was. Denise Johnson's life had been built on sacrifice. For 20 years, she had worked as a nurse at the county hospital, pulling double shifts so often, her coworkers joked she should have a cot in the break room. She laughed with them. But privately she carried exhaustion in her bones. Raising Malik alone had meant she never really slept. She had been there for every science fair, every debate tournament, every awards ceremony, even if it meant dragging herself in still wearing scrubs. Her paycheck stretched thin, but she saved enough to buy him textbooks, private tutors when he fell behind in calculus, even the robotics kit he had begged for in 9th grade. Neighbors knew her as the woman who never gave up, and they knew Malik as the boy destined to break every barrier. By the time he was a junior, people on the block would stop her in the grocery store to say, "Denise, your boy's going places. He's gonna put our neighborhood on the map." At church, older women whispered that he was the one they had all prayed for, the one who would prove to the world that brilliance lived on their side of town too. It filled her with pride, yes, but also pressure. Malik's success wasn't just his own. It belonged to everyone who saw him as a beacon. That made his rejection feel like more than a personal blow. It felt like betrayal by a system that had dangled hope, then snatched it away. Denise tried to bury her doubts, but they had always been there. When Malik was in middle school, she remembered a teacher calling to say he was too argumentative in class. Denise had asked what that meant, and the teacher explained that Malik asked too many questions, challenged explanations. She had laughed at first. Wasn't that what smart kids did? But the teacher's tone hadn't been amused. It had been weary, as though Malik's sharp mind was a problem. Later in high school, one of Malik's guidance counselors suggested he apply to more realistic colleges. Denise had bristled. Realistic for who? She asked. She had seen the counselor's eyes flicker, the answer unspoken but loud enough. Realistic for a black boy. So when she read the note, now, too outspoken. Better to avoid trouble. It echoed everything she had feared, but refused to voice. The world wasn't blind to Malik's brilliance. It just didn't want brilliance that questioned, that stood tall, that refused to shrink itself. The next morning, Denise woke with determination. She wasn't going to sit quietly. She needed answers. After dropping Malik at school, she parked outside the guidance office, her heart pounding. Inside, the air smelled faintly of printer ink and floor wax. The walls were lined with college brochures, smiling faces staring back from glossy covers. Ms. Garrison, the senior counselor, looked up from her desk when Denise entered. She was a brisk woman in her 50s, silver hair cut sharp around her jawline, glasses perched low. "Mrs. Johnson," she said, surprised. "Is everything all right?" Denise sat down without waiting to be invited. "I need to talk about Malik's application to Eldenridge." The counselor folded her hands neatly, choosing her words with the kind of care bureaucrats used when they knew more than they wanted to admit. College admissions are always competitive. Malik is an exceptional student, but sometimes schools look for different qualities. Denise leaned forward. "Different qualities? What exactly does that mean?" Miss Garrison cleared her throat. "Fit, environment. Every institution has its own culture." The word landed heavy, familiar, ugly. Culture. Denise thought of the note in her pocket. Her eyes narrowed. "So are you saying Malik didn't belong there?" The counselor hesitated, shifting in her chair. "That's not what I said, but I've seen cases where colleges worry about how certain students will adjust. Especially if they—" She trailed off, her face tightening as though she realized she'd said too much. Denise's pulse quickened. "If they what?" The silence stretched, fragile as glass. Ms. Garrison adjusted her glasses, her composure faltering. Finally, almost against her will, she murmured, "If they're perceived as outspoken." The word struck Denise like a slap. Outspoken. The same word from the note. Her breath caught. "You've heard that before." Ms. Garrison stiffened. "I didn't say that." But it was too late. The slip was out. The mask cracked. Denise sat back slowly, fury and heartbreak colliding in her chest. For years she had bitten her tongue, trusted the process, told Malik to keep his head down and his grades up. And now here it was, the quiet, suffocating truth. They didn't want her son not because he lacked brilliance, but because his brilliance wasn't docile. Her hands clenched in her lap, nails digging into her palms. She could feel the whole weight of generations pressing down on her. Every promise made to black families, about equal opportunity. Every time they had been told to just work harder, be better, prove themselves, and yet the bar kept moving, the rules kept shifting. Denise's voice was low, but her words cut. "You're telling me they didn't see him as a scholar. They saw him as a problem." Miss Garrison looked away, her silence more damning than any admission. Denise stood, her chair scraping against the linoleum. Her heart raced as she steadied herself against the desk. She hadn't come here expecting confirmation, but she had gotten it anyway, in the slip of a word, in the refusal to deny it outright. She turned to leave, her eyes burning, her fists trembling. Malik had to know. But before she reached the door, Ms. Garrison's voice followed, softer now, almost regretful. "Mrs. Johnson, there's more to this than you realize." Denise froze, her hand on the doorknob. She turned slowly. "What do you mean?" The counselor's lips pressed together, her eyes heavy with a conflict she didn't want to share. For a moment, it seemed like she might stay silent. Then, with a sigh, she whispered words that made Denise's stomach drop. Eldenridge wasn't just rejecting him. They were warned. Leads into Section 3. Whispers in the hallways. The rain had turned the back steps of the auditorium into a sheen of spilled mercury. Malik stood under the overhang, the hood of his jacket up, the glow of the exit sign painting his face a low red. 10 minutes felt like an hour. When the door finally cracked open, he half expected a prank. Some kid with a camera, ready to post his jump scare to confessions. Instead, a slender silhouette slipped out, the hall light behind them throwing their face into shadow. "Don't look at me," the voice said, low, urgent. "Just take this." A hand extended, pale in the dim, trembling slightly, holding a folded printout and a thumb drive taped inside a library checkout card. Malik didn't move. "Who are you?" "Someone who saw something I can't unsee," the voice replied. "And someone who doesn't get to be brave in public. Not like you." The word brave landed strangely, like a compliment wrapped around a warning. Malik took the card. The tape tugged at the damp sleeve of his jacket. "Where did you get it?" "You were CC'd by mistake," the figure said, a bitter laugh catching in their throat. "Not you." "Exactly. Someone typed an M and the system filled the wrong name. I was in the chain. I shouldn't be. But here we are." A beat. Be careful what you do with it. It's a window and a trap. He started to ask another question, but the door opened wider, and a faint scatter of voices drifted down the hall. The figure stepped back, almost vanishing into the seam of the dark. Check your email, after 10. It might still be there. If not, the drive has a copy. Delete everything after you read it. Why me? Malik asked. Because you're the one they decided didn't belong, the voice said, softer now, almost breaking, and because the reason they gave each other is the reason I can't sleep. The door snicked shut. Malik stood stunned long enough for Rain to find his collar. Then he tucked the card into his backpack and walked home fast, feeling like the night itself was eavesdropping. Denise was waiting at the kitchen table when he pushed in the front door. Her scrub top swapped for an old sweatshirt, hair wrapped, eyes tired and bright all at once. You got my text, she said. Sit. Malik slipped off his jacket and didn't pretend. He set the library card on the table, the taped drive glinting dull silver. Someone sent me something. A teacher, I think. Didn't say who. Denise's hand hovered over the drive, then recoiled. We open it together. They did. The kitchen lamp cast a pool of yellow across the table, as Malik slid the drive into his laptop, and waited for the files to populate. A single PDF blinked into view. Eldenridge Prelim Deliberations, MJ.pbep. He looked at his mother. She nodded once. The first page wore the school's crest like a seal on a letter from another century. Beneath it, a line of type, Internal Committee Review, Round 1. The table read like a ledger of a person. Johnson, Malik, East Hollow High, columns for GPA, test scores, awards, leadership, a row of numbers that should have been unassailable. Then the column that mattered most, the one that didn't measure anything real. Committee notes. Malik read aloud because silence felt like it would choke him. Cultural fit concerns, candidate flagged for attitude activism risk based on external references, suggest to deny to avoid potential for reputational complications. He closed his eyes a beat, then opened them, forcing himself to keep going. Additional context. Warning call logged from East Hollow HS Guidance Office. Repattern of confrontational behavior, classroom disruptions, challenging authority, not disciplinary but behavioral culture concerns. Denise's hands, steady through emergencies, and double shifts, and too many IVs to count, began to tremble. She pressed her fingers flat to the table, as if pinning rage in place. Confrontational, she said, her voice rough. You asked questions, you led teams, you beat seniors as a sophomore at debate. That's leadership, not a threat. Malik stared at the words cultural fit until they blurred. Language that sounds neutral, he said. Built to be deniable. He clicked to the second page. It was an email chain. Subject line, R.E. Johnson Malik, Committee Deliberations. The top message was short. Proceed with deny. Keep file notes internal. Do not engage further. Below it, the thread fanned backward. A committee member summarizing. A regional admissions officer. Agreeing. A third voice cautioning that the numbers were strong but we have to trust our partners on the ground. Denise pointed. Partners on the ground. He scrolled again. A forwarded segment appeared, nested and indented like a secret. From Garrison, Marion Mearison, at East Hollow K12.us, to regional admissions, at eldenridge.edu. The timestamp was 2 weeks before the letter had arrived. Denise leaned closer, breath short. Following up on our call regarding Johnson, Malik, as the student's counselor, I feel obligated to flag patterns not evident on transcripts. He is undoubtedly bright. However, multiple staff have expressed concerns about attitude and a tendency to challenge authority in ways that destabilize classroom culture. I worry about fit in a rigorous, tradition-oriented environment. Beneath that, as if to lend weight, Garrison had included 2 examples. One debate round, where Malik argued forcefully with a judge's flawed rubric. He'd been right, the judge later admitted, and an AP Lit seminar, where he'd questioned the racial framing of a classic novel, with Ms. Ortega's blessing. The email made them read like offenses. Denise made a sound that was not quite a word. She called them. She warned them. Malik said, each syllable flat, as though if he let feeling in, it would flood the room. He scrolled. The chain continued with a reply from a regional officer. Appreciate context. We rely on nuanced local insight. We'll annotate file accordingly. Then the internal note again. Clipped and cold. Activism risk. Denise covered her mouth, then let it drop. Say it plain, she muttered. They wanted compliance. They wanted a quiet black boy. Malik sat back. He felt strangely light. The way you feel right before a fever breaks. Hot and cold all at once. The air too loud. In his mind he saw Garrison's office. The tidy desk. The clipped kindness. The way she'd never quite looked him in the eyes when she suggested realistic schools last fall. She told me this morning there were conversations, Denise said, her voice shaking with incredulity. She said Eldenridge was warned. She made it sound like the weather, like it just happened to you. Malik clicked through the attachments pane. There was one more file, internal talking points, admissions risk comms doc. He opened it. Bullet points filled the screen. Euphemisms crafted to withstand lawsuits and outrage. Use phrases like holistic review and building a cohort. Avoid direct mention of any single factor. Emphasize alignment with institutional mission over specific behaviors. And there it was again. A line that made Denise grip the table until her knuckles blanched. If pressed, reference concerns about attitude and community impact. Do not elaborate. I want to print this, Denise said, voice thin. We can't, Malik replied. They'll trace it. The file that was in my inbox earlier got revoked. Someone's watching. She recoiled as if the laptop had hissed. So what do we do? Sit here and let them decide the language that erases you. Malik didn't answer right away. The hum of the refrigerator seemed suddenly hostile. Through the thin kitchen wall, their neighbor's TV flickered with a laugh track that felt like mockery. He looked at the ceiling, at the hairline crack running diagonally across the plaster. Something you stop noticing until one day you can't see anything else. This isn't just me, he said finally. It's the way they built the maze. Those words are the walls. Denise's gaze softened even as fury stayed hot beneath it. You shouldn't have to be the one to tear them down. He gave a small, humorless smile. You raised me to use a screwdriver if that's all we've got. She almost laughed. Almost. Instead, she reached for his hand and squeezed it once. Then we use what we have. We document. We tell the truth. On our terms. He hesitated. If we make this public, Mom, Ms. Garrison keeps her job. The teacher who sent this could lose theirs. The ones who wrote those words keep their jobs whether you speak or not, she said. Silence will not pay our rent or repair what this did to your spine. There's a way to protect people and still tell the story. Malik's eyes dropped to the signature block on the chain. A name circled his mind like a hawk. Levin Cheat Garrison's email. One line above a strange, unfamiliar address. Imtucklein Ged East Hollow Daki once. He felt the ground tilt. Miss Levin, the calculus teacher who warned him about tone. Cheek Line, the robotics advisor who had defended him in the lounge. Why had both been copied? Autocomplete, the figure had said. One wrong letter, one right mistake. That's how the email had reached someone willing to help. He scrolled farther. The earlier truncated line from the preliminary review was there in full now, no longer cut by a page break. Warning call logged from East Hollow High School. Garrison, guidance. Notes corroborated by Levin Math. He read it twice, a coldness spreading from his chest to his jaw. She co-signed it, he said flatly. She stood in my class this morning and told me to mind my tone. Denise's hand went to her throat. And the robotics advisor, Klein, she was copied by mistake? That's how it looks, he said. Klein must have been the one to send this. Or someone downstream who saw it, because she raised a question. I was in the chain, they said. Denise set her jaw, something flinty sparking in her eyes. We don't guess. We don't accuse shadows. We hold the paper and we point to the words. She tapped the screen. This is the lever. They sat with the document like it was a living thing that might bite. The kitchen's old clock ticked into the heavy hush. Somewhere down the block, a siren started, wailed, and faded. Malik felt the sensation he sometimes got at the start of a debate round when he knew his case so intimately that even a bad judge couldn't keep him from the line of logic. A steadiness that was not the same as calm. What do we do first? He asked. Denise looked at the note in her apron pocket, the one that had fallen out of the envelope. Not a fit for their culture, too outspoken. Better to avoid trouble. We put the words side by side, she said. The anonymous note. This chain. The talking point. We show how they say the same thing, without saying it. And then we find someone who will put it where people can't pretend they didn't read. Malik thought of the students in the hallway, the way gossip skittered along the floor like dropped marbles. He thought of the alumni tweets, the threadbare defenses of holistic review. He thought of his neighbors, of Mitt Turner, from 3B, who had pressed $20 into his palm for application fees, with a smile that held back tears of Pastor Reed, who had called him the promise of our pews. He thought of the kids watching who had not yet learned the names of these walls. Okay, he said. We go bigger. They spent the next hour drafting a timeline. What to save, what to black out, what to keep in a folder that could be handed to a lawyer if it ever came to that. Denise insisted on printing nothing. Malik toggled to screenshots, to encrypted backup, to a second email he rarely used. Twice the cursor froze, twice his heart jumped, once a session expired banner flashed and vanished. He breathed shallowly, until the screen steadied. When they finally shut the laptop, the kitchen had thinned to midnight. Denise poured tea she didn't drink. Malik stared at the dark window and saw, in the reflection, a version of himself who had not opened the PDF. That boy's shoulders were still set for a different kind of battle, one in which effort alone was enough. The boy in the kitchen now knew better. Could this change things? Denise asked quietly. Not just a rhetorical question, an inventory of hope. It could change what they have to admit out loud, Malik said, and sometimes that's the only way anything moves. Denise nodded, a small motion that carried a lifetime. Then we move it. They were clearing the mugs when Malik's phone buzzed across the table. A number he didn't recognize. He let it ring twice, 3 times. Denise arched an eyebrow. He answered on speaker. Hello? Is this Malik Johnson? The voice was warm but professional. Wind in the background. The faint beep of a crosswalk. It is. My name is Ethan Morales. I'm a reporter with the Lakeview Tribune. A pause, respectful. I've been hearing some whispers around East Hollow. About an email from Eldenridge. I don't want to put you in a corner, but if you're willing to talk, I think your story deserves daylight. Another pause. And I think you might not be the only one. Denise and Malik stared at each other, across the table. The air between them suddenly electric. The next choice hanging like a door between rooms. Mr. Morales, Malik said carefully, feeling the floor tilt toward a future he couldn't yet see. What exactly have you heard? The call clicked. A second line buzzed in, and Malik's phone lit with a new unknown message that made his mouth go dry before he even opened it. If you talk to the press, you should know. Your counselor is already asking who leaked the file. The voice on the other end of the phone had carried a steady current, neither rushing Malik, nor letting him retreat. Ethan Morales, the reporter, had offered a choice, not a demand, and that, more than anything, was why Malik agreed to meet him. The following afternoon, Malik sat in the back corner of a diner off Main Street, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and a jukebox no one had fed in years. Denise insisted on coming too, sliding into the booth beside her son, her eyes alert. Ethan arrived with a notepad tucked under his arm, and a recorder he didn't switch on until Malik gave a nod. Off the record until you say otherwise, Ethan said. His voice was calm, his manner disarming. He wasn't pushing for sound bites. He was leaning forward, elbows on the table, listening like the story mattered before it was even printed. Malik took a breath, then told him everything. The late-night email, the note in the envelope, the coded language of cultural fit and activism risk. Denise added the counselor's slip in her office, the way words like outspoken were wielded as a warning rather than a strength. Ethan wrote in shorthand, but he also asked questions that drew out the marrow of the story. Tell me about debate, he said. What does leading feel like? Malik surprised himself with the answer. Like building a bridge in front of people who'd rather watch you swim. Every round I win is proof the water's shallow. Ethan's eyes flickered, the kind of look reporters got when a line hit bone. And robotics? It's the opposite, Malik said. No audience. Just design. Proof that I can build something that stands. Denise listened, her chest tightening at the way her son's voice balanced pride with weariness. Ethan didn't just want the paper trail. He wanted the boy who had lived it. By the end of the interview, Ethan clicked the recorder off. I won't run anything you're not comfortable with, he promised. But I need you to know, this isn't just your story. This is a pattern. I've covered students like you before. None of them had documents this clear. Denise folded her arms. What happens if it goes out there? 2 things, Ethan said. It catches fire, and it catches heat. The college will deny, people will defend, but once it's out, it can't be stuffed back in the drawer. Malik nodded slowly. Then print it. 2 days later, the article hit the Lakeview Tribune's website. The headline was clean but loaded. Eldenridge rejection raises questions. Local students' file shows cultural fit concerns. The story unfolded in long paragraphs. Not just the leak but the life around it. Malik's GPA, his robotics team, his debate championships, the sacrifices Denise had made. Ethan had included snippets of the talking points document, blacked out for legal caution but unmistakable in tone. He described the coded phrases, the anonymous note, the counselor's role. Malik's photo, taken by Ethan in the diner booth, showed him with his hands clasped in front of him, not smiling but not defeated either. Within hours, the link was everywhere. Twitter threads braided outrage with disbelief. Let Malik in trended locally, then nationally by evening. Students from other schools began replying with their own stories of rejection letters laced with euphemisms. Alumni from Eldenridge shared anecdotes about the unspoken rules of who thrived and who left after one semester. Denise sat at the kitchen table, refreshing the feed, her thumb moving faster than her breath. Look, she told Malik, holding up her phone. A stranger from another state had posted, I was told to show humility in my essays. Translation, don't remind them I'm black and brilliant. Thousands of likes. Malik scrolled his own mentions. His inbox was flooded with messages of solidarity. Students he didn't know saying they'd felt invisible in applications. Teachers sharing articles on implicit bias. A video clip surfaced of Malik at a debate championship, his voice calm, his points sharp, the judges nodding despite themselves. Someone captioned it, too outspoken, or too undeniable. It went viral overnight. But with the flood came undertow. Anonymous accounts called him entitled. One thread insisted he was a diversity hire gone wrong. Though no one could reconcile that with his achievements. Denise warned him not to read too deeply. He tried, but curiosity was its own compulsion. At school, the atmosphere split down the seams. Some students clapped him on the back in the hall, whispering, "We got you, man." Others avoided eye contact, their silence thicker than mockery. In class, when Ortega mentioned Baldwin's line about carrying history inside you, every head turned toward Malik. Even teachers fractured. Mr. Patel congratulated him quietly, saying, "What you're doing is bigger than grades." Miss Levin, however, pulled him aside after calculus. "You should be careful," she murmured. "Attention can distort the truth. Colleges don't appreciate being vilified." "Neither do students who get erased," Malik replied. Her mouth tightened, but she didn't argue. By midweek, national outlets had picked up the story. Larger papers reframed it as a question of institutional bias. Commentators debated whether cultural fit was a reasonable metric or a coded exclusion. Some called it a one-off mistake. Others pointed to decades of data showing black students admitted at lower rates despite equal qualifications. Ethan called to check in. "How are you holding up?" "Like I'm on trial," Malik said. "You're not," Ethan reassured. "But they'll make you feel like you are. Stay grounded. Your voice is the anchor." Denise added, "And what about the school?" "They'll respond," Ethan said. "They always do, and they'll try to sound both sympathetic and dismissive. That's their strategy." He was right. On Thursday morning, just as Malik was brushing his teeth before school, his phone pinged with a push notification. He opened it, and the headline stopped him mid-rinse. Eldenridge issues statement, denies allegations of bias. He scrolled quickly, toothpaste foam drying in his mouth. The statement was brief, almost icy in its detachment. Eldenridge University remains committed to fair, holistic admissions. While we cannot discuss individual applicants, any suggestion that decisions are based on race or cultural identity is categorically false. We urge the public not to be misled by incomplete information circulated without context. Our mission remains excellence, integrity, and opportunity. No mention of the leaked documents. No acknowledgement of the phrases Malik had read in black and white. Just denial, wrapped in polished language, dismissive of his truth. Malik stared at the screen until his reflection blurred in the bathroom mirror. Downstairs, Denise's phone buzzed with the same alert. She read it twice, then whispered, "They're calling us liars." At school, whispers were louder than ever. Some students showed him the statement on their phones, saying, "See? Maybe it was all just a mix-up." Others rolled their eyes, muttering, "Typical. Deny, deny, deny." Noah cornered him at his locker. "You gonna let them skate like that?" Zara added, her eyes fierce. "This is where they hope you fold. Don't fold." Malik nodded, but inside the doubt crept cold. How much could truth weigh if the institution with all the power called it false? He opened his locker and found a note taped inside. No name, just handwriting. It read, "Don't stop. They're afraid you'll find the rest." He folded it quickly, his heart hammering. He didn't know who had left it, but it told him one thing. The leak wasn't finished. Someone inside the machine still wanted him to see more. And if that was true, then the fight was only just beginning. The anonymous message had arrived with the weight of a ticking clock. Malik barely slept that night, the glow of his laptop searing into the early hours, as he read the single line again and again. "Meet me on campus Monday night. I was inside. I have proof." By the time Monday evening came, the tension in his chest had calcified into something sharp. Denise insisted on driving him. She parked 2 blocks from the college gates, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tight her knuckles blanched. "You don't go in there alone," she said. Malik nodded, though his mind was already racing ahead. He carried nothing but his phone and a notebook. If there was danger, it wouldn't be from weapons. It would be from silence forced back onto him. They waited near the shadow of the old stone library, its Gothic arches looming against the moonlit sky. The campus was mostly deserted, students tucked inside dorms, only the occasional shuffle of footsteps across wet pavement. At precisely 9, a woman approached, her trench coat drawn tight, her pace brisk but unhurried. She carried a leather satchel and kept glancing over her shoulder. "Malik Johnson?" she asked when she reached them, her voice low. "Yes," he said carefully. She extended a hand. "Clara Whitman. I used to sit on the other side of those admissions tables." Denise's eyebrows shot up. "Former?" Clara gave a grim smile. "I quit 6 months ago. Conscience has a way of dragging you out the door." She tapped her satchel. "I've brought files I shouldn't still have. But if I don't hand them to someone, I'll never sleep again." Inside a quiet cafe off campus, Clara spread documents across the table. Denise sat protectively close to Malik, while Clara's hands trembled as she smoothed out the papers. The lamplight caught the watermark on the letterhead, Eldenridge University, confidential. "These are evaluation summaries from the last 5 years, Clara explained. "Every applicant gets scored on academics, extracurriculars, essays, recommendations. That's the part parents and students focus on. But there's another column, personality fit." Malik leaned forward, scanning the sheets. His stomach twisted. Each row bore a name, GPA, test scores, many dazzling, immaculate. Yet in the personality fit column, cryptic shorthand appeared. One line read, "Strong academic profile, but perceived intensity, risk of activism." Another, "High achiever, but concerns humility and cultural integration." And another still, "Promising candidate, but confidence may be misread as confrontation." "These are mostly black applicants," Clara said softly, pointing to highlighted rows. "The pattern is clear. Strong academics, glowing leadership, but flagged for subjective fit concerns." Denise's voice caught. "You mean they never had a chance?" Clara's lips tightened. Not once those notes went in. Personality fit became the polite knife. Malik's eyes landed on one row halfway down the page. His chest tightened. His own name stared back at him, in black ink. Johnson, Malik. GPA 4.2. Test scores 1500 SAT. Achievements, robotics captain, debate champion. And then the comments. Academically exceptional. Leadership notable. However, flagged for pattern of challenging authority. Risk of disruptive activism. Not an optimal cultural fit. The words seared. He read them twice, then a third time, until they felt less like letters and more like chains. Denise clutched his wrist. "That's them. That's what they did to you." Clara exhaled, shakily. "I argued against it quietly, in meetings, but you can only push so far before you get labeled yourself. The machine protects itself." Malik stared at Clara. "Why now? Why give this to me?" "Because your story broke through," she said. "Most students never see the notes. They just get the rejection letter, then they disappear into statistics. But you have the receipts, and now others are speaking. The institution is scrambling. That's when truth has the best chance to stick." She slid another folder across the table. "This is aggregate data they don't want public. 5 years of admissions broken down by race, GPA and acceptance rate." Malik opened it, his breath faltering as he scanned the numbers. Black students with GPAs above 4.0 had acceptance rates nearly half those of white students with the same scores. At 3.8 GPAs, the disparity widened further. The data was clean, undeniable. Denise's hand covered her mouth.
My God.
It's systemic, Clara said. Not one bad counselor. Not one biased committee member. It's policy wrapped in euphemism. For a moment, the cafe was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. Malik felt as if the air itself was pressing down on him. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about hundreds, thousands, whose brilliance had been quietly rerouted, disguised as failure. Clara's voice broke the quiet. If you publish this, they'll come after you, not just in the press. Legally. They'll claim these are stolen documents. They'll threaten lawsuits. They'll try to ruin credibility. Denise straightened in her chair. So we just let them bury it? Clara shook her head. No. You publish smart. Redact names of other applicants. Keep the focus on patterns, not individuals. The power is in the data, not the anecdotes. Malik swallowed. And you? What happens to you? Clara gave a small, resigned shrug. I've already lost my career. But maybe that's the price of sleeping at night. They left the cafe with the files tucked deep in Malik's backpack, the night air colder than when they had entered. Denise kept scanning the street, her instincts sharp from years of protecting Malik against subtler threats. We need to lock these up, she said. Copies back up, somewhere safe. At home, Malik scanned each document into encrypted folders. Denise watched the printer light flash with each page, her nerves taut. Every line felt radioactive. When the files were secured, Malik sat back, the exhaustion of weeks catching him at once. We can prove it now, he said quietly. We can prove it's not just me. Denise nodded, but her eyes were far away, already imagining the storm ahead. The storm didn't take long. 2 days later, Malik was walking home from school when his phone vibrated with a new email. The subject line chilled him. Notice of pending action, Eldridge University Legal Affairs. He stopped in his tracks. With trembling fingers, he opened it. The message was curt, clinical, and devastating. Mr. Johnson, it has come to our attention that you are in possession of confidential university documents. Unauthorized use or distribution of these materials constitutes a violation of state and federal law. Continued dissemination may result in immediate legal action against you and your family. You are instructed to cease and desist all communication regarding said documents. Denise was waiting on the porch when he arrived home, her face pale. She held her own phone aloft, showing the same email. They sent it to me too, she whispered. Malik dropped his backpack, the weight of the whistleblower's file suddenly suffocating. He felt the ground shift beneath him, proof of injustice in one hand, the threat of retaliation in the other. The university had drawn its line, and Malik realized, with a cold clarity, that the fight was about to become more dangerous than he had ever imagined. By the time the sun rose on Friday, Malik's story was no longer just his. It had become something else, something larger, something heavier than even he had imagined. Overnight, the hashtags had multiplied, stretching far beyond East Hollow and Lakeview. Let Malik in. Cultural fit means white. Denied for being black. The tags trended in waves, climbing Twitter's sidebar, breaking into TikTok montages, stitched with clips of students in dorm rooms, telling their own rejection stories. Malik sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open, phone buzzing constantly beside him. Denise poured coffee but forgot to drink it. Her eyes locked on the screen as tweet after tweet scrolled past. One came from a girl in Ohio. They told me my essays lacked humility. Translation: stop being proud of where I come from. Let Malik in. Another from California. I had a 4.3 GPA, AP scholar, varsity captain, rejected from Eldridge with no explanation. Reading Malik's story, I see it now. I was never the fit. Denise pressed a hand to her chest. They're coming out of the woodwork. Malik only nodded, his jaw tight. He felt like a door had been cracked open and the draft rushing in carried voices that had been waiting, suffocating in silence. By noon, alumni had joined in. A thread from a black former student went viral. At Eldridge, we were told to be grateful for being there. Grateful meant don't question the syllabus. Don't protest when your dorm mate calls you a slur. Don't lead too loud. Malik's rejection isn't shocking. It's policy in practice. Screenshots of yearbook pages circulated, showing black faces sprinkled like tokens across class composites, each captioned with the same eerie similarity, student leader, community contributor, bridge builder, words that in context felt less like praise and more like containment. On Instagram, students posted side-by-side acceptance letters, with eerily familiar language. The euphemisms lined up like coded scripts. We regret to inform you, while your credentials are outstanding, we must consider cultural alignment. A TikTok of a former student, teary-eyed in her car, spread across feeds. They told me I was too outspoken. I believed them. I thought it was my fault. Hearing about Malik, I realized it wasn't me. It was them. Denise gripped Malik's arm as she watched. You're not alone, baby. You never were. Malik's throat ached with something he couldn't swallow down. He didn't want to be a symbol, but the current was bigger than him now. By the weekend, cable news anchors were debating Eldridge on primetime panels. Some called the scandal a teachable moment. Others, mostly older alumni defending their alma mater, insisted the outrage was misplaced. Admissions are tough, one said. Not every rejection is racism. But the rebuttals grew louder. Another guest shot back. When the language repeats across cases, when cultural fit means students of color get coded as risky, you don't call that coincidence. You call it discrimination. Clips from Malik's debate competitions resurfaced online, spliced with the damning committee notes. Activism risk. The juxtaposition was undeniable. A poised, articulate young man, dismantling an opponent's argument, versus the bureaucratic shorthand branding him a threat. One viral tweet captioned it simply, "This is what they fear." Malik scrolled late, into the night, unable to look away. For every message of support, there was another drenched in venom. Affirmative action kid throwing a tantrum. If you were really brilliant, you wouldn't need excuses. Anonymous accounts tagged him relentlessly, trying to bury his story under bile. Denise tried to confiscate his phone. You don't need to read the poison. But it's part of the story, Malik said, voice flat. The backlash is proof. At school, the atmosphere was combustible. Students rallied outside the main entrance with homemade posters. We stand with Malik. Bias isn't a fit. Education, not exclusion. A teacher tried to disperse them, but by the next day local news cameras were parked on the curb. Inside, the hallways buzzed. Some students treated Malik like a celebrity, snapping photos, tagging him in solidarity posts. Others muttered as he passed, their voices just low enough to avoid direct confrontation. In history class, Mr. Davison lectured on civil rights movements of the 1960s. His words oddly pointed. Change often starts with individuals who never asked to become symbols. Their pain becomes public. Their names carry weight. They didn't. Every eye in the room slid toward Malik. He shifted in his chair, heat crawling up his neck. He didn't want to be Rosa Parks. Didn't want to be Medgar Evers. He just wanted the truth to mean something. At lunch, Zara sat across from him, her phone buzzing with updates. It's trending in DC now. Lawmakers are tweeting. You've become a case study. Noah leaned in. We should organize a formal statement. Debate, robotics, the honor society. Make it collective. They can't paint you as one bitter kid. Malik exhaled. I don't want this to swallow the whole school. Zara's voice sharpened. It already has. That night, Malik and Denise watched the national news together. A host framed his story as a question. Is Eldridge University the face of a larger problem? A panel of experts nodded in solemn agreement. Denise muttered. They're circling. The institution's brand is on trial. But what struck Malik wasn't the debate. It was the ticker scrolling across the bottom of the screen. Former Eldridge students speak out. One clip showed a black alum, now in her 30s, recalling, they praised me for my leadership on campus, until I tried to lead a protest. Then suddenly I was disruptive. That's when I realized those words were just cages. Another spoke of being assigned a faculty mentor, who told him flatly, don't be the angry black kid. That's the fastest way out. Each story layered onto Malik's like sediment. He wasn't just an outlier. He was the surface crack of a deep fault line. On Sunday morning, Denise's phone rang. She answered cautiously, then mouthed to Malik. It's Ethan. He held the line on speaker. You two should brace. Ethan said. I'm hearing chatter that the university is convening an emergency PR team. They'll try to paint this as isolated. One counselor's misstep. One committee's phrasing. They'll distance the institution from the words themselves. Denise clenched her jaw. But the words came from them. Doesn't matter, Ethan replied. Their brand is survival. They'll sacrifice individuals before they admit systemic bias. Inside was a single line of text. Meet me on campus Monday night. I was inside. I have proof. Attached was a preview of a file partial. Cropped. Just enough to see Eldenridge's crest, and the words Confidential Admissions Committee. Historical Trends by Race Ethnicity. Denise leaned over his shoulder, her face pale. This isn't just about you anymore, she whispered. Malik stared at the screen, pulse quickening. The words glared back like a warning, and a promise. Someone inside the institution wanted the truth out. And if that file was real, it could unravel everything Eldenridge had tried to deny. The cease and desist email sat on the kitchen table like a live wire. Malik and Denise stared at it on separate phones, each screen glowing the same chilling words. The house, usually filled with the hum of Denise's small television, in the background or Malik's soft music leaking from his room, was silent. Even the old refrigerator seemed to hesitate before kicking on. They're threatening us, Denise whispered, almost to herself. She set her phone down with trembling hands, rubbing her forehead as though the words had burned into her skin. They're not playing anymore. Malik leaned back in his chair, fingers laced tightly together. It's intimidation. They don't want this getting out. That means what we have is real. Denise's eyes flashed. Real doesn't keep us safe, Malik. Do you understand what they're saying? They'll drag us into court. We don't have money for lawyers. They'll bury us under paperwork and bills until we can't breathe. Her voice cracked. Malik had only heard it crack like that a handful of times, once when the hospital called about his grandmother's passing, once when their landlord threatened eviction, and now, he looked at her, seeing not just his mother but the decades of weight she carried. The double shifts, the nights she fell asleep at the wheel in the parking lot before dragging herself upstairs, the meals she skipped so he could have enough. And now the university wasn't just denying him, they were threatening her. I can't let them scare us quiet, Malik said, his voice low but steady. You can't let them destroy us either, Denise shot back. That night, Denise couldn't sleep. She sat on the couch, staring at the folded paper copy Malik had printed of the whistleblower's file, the evidence that had upended their lives. Every line felt radioactive. She imagined men in suits pounding on their door, seizing their belongings, hauling Malik's laptop away like a criminal's contraband. Her maternal instinct screamed one thing: protect, hide, pull her boy back into safety's shadows. But another voice, quieter yet insistent, reminded her that safety had never been guaranteed. Not when Malik was 6 and his teacher called him aggressive for speaking too confidently. Not when he was 12 and a store clerk followed him through every aisle. Not even now when he'd done everything right and still been marked as trouble. Silence had never been safety. It had only been survival. The next morning, Malik found her in the kitchen again. Hair still wrapped, circles under her eyes. He set his phone on the table. Mom, look at this. It was a video from Twitter. Students at another high school across the state marching with signs that read, "Justice for Malik." Their voices rang through the streets, their chant carrying through speakers, tinny but fierce. No more cultural fit. We demand the truth. Denise pressed a hand to her lips. That's for you? For us, Malik corrected. They've taken our story and made it theirs too. He scrolled further. Alumni petitions demanding an independent investigation. Professors from other universities writing op-eds about coded bias in admissions. Even lawmakers tweeting the headline with clipped statements, deeply troubling, must be addressed. Denise's eyes watered. It's spreading. Because we didn't stay quiet, Malik said softly. We can't stop now. But Denise still hesitated. That evening, Pastor Reed visited after hearing the news. He sat in their worn armchair, his Bible balanced on one knee, his voice calm but edged with concern. Child, I know courage runs through your family's blood, he told Malik. But so does caution. Institutions like Eldenridge don't bend easy. They break the bones of whoever pushes hardest. Denise looked at him gratefully, as if he were speaking her thoughts aloud. That's what I'm afraid of, she said. Pastor Reed sighed. Still, truth has a way of outlasting stone. You just have to decide how much of yourself you're willing to give it. Malik nodded, respect in his posture but fire in his eyes. I'm willing. The turning point came on Wednesday, when a crowd gathered outside East Hollow High. Students, parents, even strangers from nearby towns held posters and chanted. The principal tried to keep them off school property, but they lined the sidewalks, waving at cars, holding Malik's photo high. Denise drove past the crowd slowly, heart hammering, as Malik sat beside her stunned. His classmates had taken the risk. They had put his name in their throats. "They're showing us we're not alone," Malik whispered. Denise swallowed hard. For years she had shouldered the fight alone in smaller ways, battling teachers' assumptions, negotiating with landlords, stretching paychecks. To see a crowd stand shoulder to shoulder for her son, it broke something in her chest wide open. She pulled over, parked, and turned to him. "All right, we fight, but we do it smart. We don't let them drag us blind into their trap. We use every ally, every voice." Malik smiled, relief washing over him. Together. That night, the living room was filled with neighbors and friends. Noah and Zara from school, Miss Ortega, who had been quietly supportive since the beginning. Even Miss Klein, the robotics advisor, slipped in nervously, offering to help coordinate media outreach. "This isn't just your burden," Miss Ortega said, her voice firm. "It belongs to all of us now." The room buzzed with energy. Ideas, strategies, warnings. Denise took notes. Malik listened, and for once the walls of their small apartment didn't feel suffocating. They felt fortified. By the end of the meeting, Malik knew one thing. Silence was no longer an option. Too many voices were rising with him. 2 days later, Ethan Morales called again. "They're circling harder," he warned. "The university's lawyers are whispering about defamation. But here's the flip side. You've caught national attention." "What kind of attention?" Malik asked warily. Ethan hesitated, then chuckled. "The kind you can't hide from. Focus Tonight with Diane Keller just called me. They want you on their show. Prime time. Full segment." Malik froze, his phone pressed tight to his ear. Denise across the room stiffened. "Who was that?" she asked. Malik lowered the phone, his voice quiet, almost disbelieving. "They want me on national TV." Denise's breath hitched. The kitchen clock ticked in the silence that followed, each second sounding louder than the last. She whispered, almost to herself, "If you say yes, there's no turning back." Malik looked at her, his jaw tightening. That's the point. The morning after Malik's television appearance, the world felt different. He and Denise woke to a flood of notifications. More messages than either of them could manage. Journalists requesting follow-up interviews. Strangers thanking him for speaking. Trolls still jeering, but drowned out now by the sheer magnitude of voices, echoing the same demand. Investigate Eldridge. Civil rights groups were the first to seize the moment. The National Education Equity Coalition released a statement before dawn. The allegations raised by Malik Johnson expose systemic practices that undermine equal opportunity. We call for a full federal investigation into Eldridge University's admissions policies. Within hours, the ACLU added their voice, followed by smaller grassroots organizations, each amplifying the pressure. By midday, the demand was no longer a chorus. It was a roar. Hashtags shifted from "Let Malik in" to "Investigate Eldridge" and "End Coded Bias." Petition sites reported over 200,000 signatures in less than 24 hours. Denise sat at the kitchen table, scrolling, whispering, "This is bigger than us now. Way bigger." Malik, still bleary from a night of half-sleep, nodded. "That's what scares them. Not me. Not us. The pattern." Pressure seeped quickly into the halls of power. At a press briefing, a White House correspondent asked the education secretary directly, "Will the department investigate Eldridge University's admissions practices?" The secretary avoided specifics but admitted, "These reports raise deeply troubling questions." That soundbite aired on every network by evening. Congressional representatives began chiming in. Some tweeted cautiously about ensuring fairness in higher education. Others went further. A progressive senator from New York posted, "Cultural fit is not an excuse for discrimination. Eldridge, and every elite university, must be held accountable." Denise read the tweet aloud, her voice carrying disbelief. "A senator, Malik, do you realize? They're saying your name in the same breath as legislation." Malik didn't know whether to feel pride or dread. He had wanted truth. But now the truth was running faster than he could keep up. Meanwhile, the streets began to fill. On Saturday morning, hundreds of protesters gathered outside Eldridge's ivy-covered gates. They carried signs with Malik's photo alongside messages like, "Brains not bias," "Our kids belong here," and "Holistic racist code." Chants of "Let him in, let us in," echoed against the stone walls. Police erected barricades, though the protest remained peaceful. Alumni in suits stood shoulder to shoulder with high school students in hoodies, their voices blending into one. Malik watched the live stream on his phone, his throat tightening as he saw strangers carrying his image like a banner. Denise sat beside him, wiping at tears she didn't bother to hide. You see this? They're not just marching for you. They're marching for every kid they tried to box out. But in the comments section of the livestream, Malik saw the backlash too. Professional victim. Race card again. This is manufactured outrage. For every cheer, a sneer. He closed the app and exhaled. It feels like the whole country is choosing sides. Denise touched his shoulder. They've been choosing for a long time. You just forced them to say it out loud. The university, cornered by growing protests, released another statement. This one was longer, but no less cold. Eldon Ridge University has always strived to foster a diverse, inclusive environment. While we understand concerns raised by recent media reports, we reject the notion that our admissions process is discriminatory. We welcome an independent review and are confident it will validate our integrity. Ethan Morales, the journalist, called Malik minutes after it dropped. They're trying to pivot, he said. First deny, then invite a review, so they look transparent without conceding anything. So what do we do? Malik asked. Keep the pressure up, Ethan replied. Investigations don't happen because institutions volunteer. They happen because the public won't let go. That afternoon, Denise's phone rang again, this time from Pastor Reed. Turn on Channel 7, he urged. They did. The screen showed drone footage of Eldon Ridge's campus, the green lawns now packed with thousands. The Chiron read, growing calls for federal probe into elite university. A reporter's voice narrated, protests are spreading to other campuses. Students at Yale, Princeton and Stanford held solidarity rallies today, chanting Malik Johnson's name. Meanwhile, lawmakers are drafting a bipartisan letter urging the Department of Education to launch an immediate inquiry. Denise's hand went to her chest. Solidarity rallies, she repeated softly, as though testing the words on her tongue. Malik stared at the footage, crowds chanting a name that was his, though it no longer felt like it belonged to him alone. It was strange, surreal, terrifying. I didn't ask for this, he murmured. No one asks, Denise said gently. But sometimes history taps you on the shoulder anyway. By Sunday evening, the story had eclipsed sports scores and weather reports. National news anchors framed it not as a college admissions story, but as a referendum on America itself. This is no longer about one student. One anchor intoned gravely. It's about whether the gates of opportunity are still barred by invisible chains. Eldon Ridge University is a symbol now, of whether meritocracy is a promise or a myth. The words sank deep into Malik's bones. He was no longer just a boy with a rejection letter. He was, unwillingly, a mirror held up to the nation. That night, after Denise finally dozed off on the couch, Malik sat at the kitchen table again. His laptop glowed with unread emails, offers of scholarships from other universities, interview requests, threats buried between the support. He rubbed his temples, exhaustion threading through him. A knock at the door startled him. He tensed, listening. It came again, firmer. Carefully, he rose and peeked through the peephole. Nothing, just an envelope slipped beneath the door. He picked it up, frowning. The paper was heavy, the return address embossed in gold. He carried it to the table, heart pounding. When Denise stirred awake, he held it up. Mom, look. She rubbed her eyes, squinting. What is it? He turned it so she could see the seal. Her breath caught. United States Senate. Hands shaking. Malik tore it open. Inside was a single-page letter on official letterhead. Mr. Johnson, your courage has sparked a vital national conversation. We are convening hearings on equity in higher education and request your testimony before the Senate Committee on Education and Civil Rights. Your voice is essential. Malik looked up, his face pale, his heart pounding in his throat. Denise's eyes widened. They want you in Washington. The letter slipped slightly in his trembling hands. He realized with sudden clarity, this wasn't just about fighting a university anymore. It was about stepping into the nation's capital, where every word would be recorded, scrutinized, and remembered. And this time, silence would not be an option. The train into Washington rattled like a long-held breath being released in metal jolts. Malik sat by the window, his reflection wavering against the blurred scenery, the Capitol dome looming closer with each passing mile. Denise sat across from him, her hand resting on his backpack, protective even now, as if the documents inside, carefully redacted copies of Clara Whitman's files, were more fragile than paper. Neither spoke much during the ride. The gravity of what lay ahead pressed down heavier than words could carry. Malik stared out the window, rehearsing fragments of sentences, but each time he tried to craft them, they felt too polished, too political. He reminded himself, tell the truth, that was enough. When they stepped off the train, cameras were already waiting. Flashes sparked as reporters shouted questions. Malik, what do you plan to say to the Senate? Are you afraid Eldridge will sue if you testify? Do you believe admissions are rigged against black students? Denise shielded him with her arm as aides ushered them into a black sedan. Malik didn't answer, not because he didn't have words, but because the moment to speak was coming, and it would not be wasted on a sidewalk scrum. The Senate hearing room was cavernous, the ceiling domed and gilded, the air heavy with history. Rows of lawmakers sat elevated behind long mahogany desks, their microphones blinking red when live. The seal of the United States loomed on the wall behind them, stern and impassive. Malik sat at the witness table, a small placard with his name before him. Denise took a seat just behind, her hands clenched around the strap of her purse. Ethan Morales sat nearby as a press observer, giving Malik the slightest nod of encouragement. The chair of the committee, Senator Avery, leaned forward, his voice booming as the cameras rolled. We are here today to examine allegations of systemic bias in college admissions, specifically regarding Eldridge University. This hearing is not about one rejection, it is about whether institutions entrusted with shaping America's future are living up to their promise of equality. He turned to Malik. Mr. Johnson, thank you for being here. Please begin.
Malik adjusted the microphone. His hands shook, but only slightly. He took a deep breath and began.
My name is Malik Johnson. I'm 17 years old. I live in East Hollow with my mother, Denise Johnson, who's sitting behind me. She's a nurse who has worked double shifts most of my life so I could focus on school. She gave up sleep, meals, and years of ease so that I could have opportunities she never had. Denise's eyes shimmered as the cameras caught her face. I've always believed in merit, Malik continued, that if you worked hard enough, the doors would open. I studied until 2 in the morning. I led our debate team to state championships. I captained our robotics team, building designs from scratch at a kitchen table that doubles as our workshop. I graduated top of my class. My teachers told me I was Ivy League material. My community believed I was proof that their sacrifices mattered. He paused, steadying his voice. Then Eldridge rejected me. That on its own isn't unusual. Students get rejections all the time. But what followed was unusual. My rejection came with a handwritten note inside the envelope. It said I wasn't a fit for their culture, that I was too outspoken, that it was better to avoid trouble. The room stirred. Later, I received leaked documents, committee notes that used phrases like cultural fit concerns and activism risk. My own counselor contacted Eldridge to warn them I had a so-called pattern of challenging authority, asking questions in class, arguing judges' rulings in debate, raising my hand when I saw bias in a book. Those weren't treated as leadership. They were treated as trouble. He looked directly at the senators. My record didn't keep me out. My voice did. And my voice is tied to who I am. Which means what kept me out wasn't my fit for their culture. It was their culture's refusal to fit me. Murmurs rippled across the chamber. Cameras zoomed. Malik opened the folder before him and slid copies of redacted documents forward. These are excerpts from Eldridge's internal records. They show a pattern. Black students with top GPAs marked as disruptive, overconfident, activism, risk. Coded words used to deny access. Meanwhile, students with lower GPAs but different skin color passed through as well-rounded. That is not holistic. That is systemic. He let the words hang. His chest rose and fell, but his voice stayed firm. This hearing is not about me asking for a seat at Eldridge anymore. It's about asking how many doors are closed in this country not because we lack the key, but because someone decided our presence would be too loud. Denise covered her mouth. The tissue she held was soaked, but her eyes never left her son. Senator Avery leaned forward. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Your testimony is powerful. We'll enter those documents into the record. Now I open the floor for questions. Senator Patel, a younger lawmaker, spoke first. Mr. Johnson, what would you say to those who argue this is just one isolated case? Malik met his gaze. I'd say one case doesn't cause students in 5 states to march in protest. It doesn't produce years of data showing acceptance rates cut in half for black applicants with the same grades. One case doesn't explain the words activism risk appearing across multiple files. Patterns prove themselves. Another senator, older, skeptical, leaned in, and yet Eldenridge has denied these claims, calling documents fabricated. How do you respond? Malik's jaw tightened. If they were fabricated, they wouldn't have sent me a legal threat demanding I stop talking about them. You don't threaten lawsuits over lies. You threaten lawsuits over truths that scare you. A few in the audience clapped before being hushed. Senator Avery banged his gavel lightly. Order. Let's proceed. The questions continued, some sympathetic, some probing, some defensive of the institution. Malik answered with the steadiness of someone who had spent years in debate. But there was no performance here. Each answer was laced with lived truth, not rehearsed rhetoric. When asked what he hoped to achieve, he said simply, transparency, accountability, and a promise to the next student that their voice will be seen as leadership, not liability. When asked what he feared, he didn't hesitate. That they'll bury this in process until the moment passes. That they'll outlast outrage. That they'll decide silence is safer, and we'll all move on. His candor hung heavy in the room. After nearly 2 hours, Senator Avery prepared to close. Mr. Johnson, your words today will live in this record. This committee thanks you for your courage. But just as the gavel lifted, another senator, tall and stern, interrupted. Senator Whitaker from Massachusetts leaned into his mic. His voice was slow, deliberate. Before we adjourn, he said, I need to add something into the record. Last night, my office received an anonymous package. Inside were files unmarked, unsigned, but bearing Eldenridge letterhead. We've had them preliminarily verified. The room stilled. Cameras swung toward him. Whitaker held up a thick stack of papers. These aren't about one student. These are aggregate admissions logs spanning 10 years. They break down acceptance rates by race, GPA, extracurriculars, and something called, he paused, reading, perceived personality alignment. Gasps rippled. Whitaker's eyes swept the room. The data shows that black applicants with GPAs above 4.0 were admitted at less than half the rate of white applicants with the same credentials. Year after year, the term perceived personality alignment appears repeatedly, often alongside phrases like tone concerns, assertiveness risk, and cultural tension. Denise's hand gripped her purse so tightly the leather squeaked. Malik froze, heart thundering. Whitaker set the papers down firmly. This isn't one boy's story. This is an institutional design, and unless Eldenridge can refute its own records, this committee will have no choice but to pursue a federal investigation with full subpoena power. The gavel banged. Cameras flashed. Reporters scrambled. Malik sat in stunned silence, realizing his fight had just erupted into something far bigger than even he'd imagined. Because now the secrets Eldenridge had hidden for decades were no longer whispers, or leaks, or anonymous notes. They were in the official record of the United States Senate. And the nation had just been given proof that the walls of FIT weren't cracks. They were a blueprint. The invitation from Focus Tonight, with Diane Keller, came with both a promise and a warning. The producer's voice over the phone was warm, practiced, and careful. We want you to tell this in your words. She said, we'll protect your privacy where we can. We'll also offer the university equal time. I need you to know that. Denise listened on speaker, arms crossed, leaning against the kitchen counter as if bracing against a strong wind. Equal time means equal power, she said when the call ended. Malik met her eyes. Power's already unequal. At least this time I get to speak where they can't hit revoke. The producer, Lila, sent over consent forms, a rundown of the segment, and unexpectedly, a call with the network's legal counsel. They've already threatened you, the lawyer said, voice flat and efficient. We take that seriously. Don't speculate. Don't accuse individuals who aren't already in the record. Stick to documents, dates, your lived experience. Denise sat at the table, with the cease and desist open beside the glossy packet. Lila had couriered. She ran a fingertip along the 4 words at the top of the legal notice. Pending legal action, immediate. As if smoothing them could make them less jagged. She looked at Malik, and said the hardest thing. If we do this, it might get worse. He nodded. Or better for the ones coming after me. The ride to the studio took them across the river at dusk, the city turning to copper and blue as lights blinked on. Malik watched the skyline through the car window, a row of glass teeth biting at a fading sky. He tried to slow his breathing. Denise squeezed his knee once, a low pulse of reassurance. Inside the studio, everything clicked and hummed. The hallway smelled faintly of coffee and hairspray. An intern with a headset greeted them by name, ushering them to a green room with a couch too soft to sit upright on, and bottled water already beading with condensation. Lila appeared, smart blazer, sneakers, a pen she kept clicking and forgetting to unclick. "Thank you for trusting us," she said, looking from Malik to Denise and back. "Quick pre-interview. We'll go wide, then narrow. Facts first, then we'll talk impact." She walked Malik through bullet points. Rejection letter. The note. The leaked committee notes. The talking points memo. Clara's aggregate data, with the names redacted. "We can show this image blurred," Lila said, tapping the print of the table with personality fit highlighted. "Confirm you've seen the original?" "I have," Malik said. "And you're willing to say on air that the cease and desist arrived after we published the article?" "Yes." Lila hesitated, then added, "One more thing, off the record, until we're live. We've independently corroborated pieces of your documents. We'll reveal that on the show. We won't name our source." Denise stiffened. "How exposed does that leave him?" Lila shook her head. "We'll own what we're reporting. You own your truth." Different lane. A makeup artist powdered Malik's forehead, softened the blue shadows under his eyes. "You okay?" she asked, quiet. He nodded, though his pulse stuttered. When she finished, he caught his reflection. A version of himself smoothed for television. The same eyes behind a new light. Backstage, the studio floor felt like a storm held in a glass. Producers counted down to commercial. The bandstand's intro music curled through the rafters. Diane Keller, tall, silver hair pulled back like a blade, walked over and took Malik's hand. Her grip was cool, steady. "I don't do hit jobs," she said simply. "I do questions. If at any point you need a second, say so." He took a breath that felt like it had weight. "Thank you." They walked to their marks. Denise took a seat in the audience, fourth row, aisle, a producer tucking a tissue into her hand like a secret pact. The studio lights came up, shock bright. Diane faced the camera, and the red tally light flared. "Good evening," she began, voice low and clear. "Tonight, a story that has turned one family's kitchen table into a national conversation about who gets a seat at America's most elite institutions." 17-year-old Malik Johnson, straight-A student, robotics captain, debate champion, was rejected by Ridge University. That alone is not unusual. What came next is a graphic filled the screen. The words cultural fit and activism, risk isolated, enlarged, shadowed to look as stark as they felt. Diane continued. "We've seen internal documents that raise questions about coded language in admissions deliberations. Ridge has denied any bias. Malik is here to tell his story." The camera pushed in. Malik felt the lens draw closer like a tide, then heard Diane's first question. "Malik, take us to the moment you opened the letter." He exhaled, slid his palms dry against his slacks. "It was late afternoon. My mom was home from a double shift. We'd saved that envelope like a future we could hold. I opened it and read, 'We regret to inform you,' and I felt," he searched for it, "not just disappointment. Erasure, like the months I spent building robots in a kitchen that's also our study hall. The nights I spent preparing to argue cases that weren't mine. None of it made it into that letter." Diane let the silence hang, respectful. Then came the note in the envelope. "My mom found it," he said. "Not official, handwritten. It said I wasn't a fit for their culture, that I was too outspoken, that it would be better to avoid trouble." A murmur rippled through the studio audience. The words seemed to ring again in the rafters. Diane lifted a page. "We have redacted committee notes that echo that sentiment. Cultural fit concerns, activism risk, challenging authority. What did it feel like to see your achievements reduced to euphemisms?" "It felt like someone had taken my voice and filed it under threat," Malik said. "Like curiosity and leadership became code for a kind of trouble I never asked for." The screen shifted to a split. Malik's debate footage on one side, the blurred column of committee notes on the other. The old clip showed him leaning forward, calm, precise, dismantling an argument with patient logic. Diane's voice floated over it. "This is the young man Ridge calls an activism risk." Denise, in the audience, pressed the tissue to her mouth. No sob, just a quiet overflow. The camera caught her for half a second, long enough to make a nation see a mother's pride and hurt braided together. Diane turned back. "The university has sent your family a cease and desist." They threatened legal action. Malik said. They told us to stop talking about documents we know are real. What did you do when you got that email? I read it out loud, he answered. And then I asked my mom if she wanted me to stop. She said we move truth forward. Denise's eyes fell. A tiny nod. Diane glanced at her notes, then at the camera. We reached out to Eldenridge. They declined to join us live. They did send a statement insisting any suggestion that decisions are based on race or cultural identity is categorically false. They allege that materials being circulated are incomplete and misleading. We'll post the full statement online. She pivoted. We also have something else. Our newsroom has obtained, from a separate source, audio of an internal training call for regional admissions staff, held last year. We have authenticated the recording. Names have been removed. A producer hit play. A filtered voice filled the studio. Tinny, unmistakable. When addressing community concerns, avoid definitive language. Use terms like holistic, community impact, attitude concerns. Do not reference race. Frame as culture and fit. The audience reacted, a sharp inhale collective enough to be a sound. Denise's hand tightened on her tissue until it shredded. Diane let the last words hang, then spoke softly. Malik, hearing that, what goes through your mind? That they built a dictionary, he said. One where the same word can cut one person and cradle another. And they taught people how to use it. Your critics say not every rejection is racism, she said. They say you're making excuses. I'm not asking for a guaranteed yes, he replied. I'm asking for a real no. One that's about my work, not about fear of what my voice might do once I get there. A few people clapped before the floor manager cut the gesture with a hand. Diane's face softened. What do you want now? Transparency, he said. For Eldenridge to release anonymized data on who they admit and who they don't. By race and GPA. Accountability for the people who codified bias into fit. And a fair shot, if not for me, for the next Malik who looks at that envelope and thinks merit will be enough. Diane paused, then asked the question that tightened every muscle in his back. Would you still go to Eldenridge if they called tomorrow with an acceptance? He thought about the kitchen table. The neighbors who said his name, like a flag. The files that turned people into risk categories. Not until they change, he said, and not if my presence becomes proof they don't need to. There was no applause this time, just a hush that felt like listening. Before the segment ended, Diane turned to the audience. We're joined tonight by Malik's mother, Denise Johnson. The camera found Denise. She stood, unsure, then straight. I'm a nurse, she said, voice steady. I've had to tell families hard truths. You don't get to hide behind language when someone's life is on the line. My son's future is on the line. So are a lot of other kids. We just want the truth. We can handle that. Diane nodded, something like gratitude in her eyes. Thank you, Miss Johnson. The final beat of the segment belonged to Malik. Diane angled toward him. For the students watching who feel invisible, she said. What do you want to say? He looked into the lens, a dark coin of light, and spoke as if the words were being built, as he said them. You are not a risk because you stand tall. You are not a problem because you ask why. If a door closes on silence, knock louder, with receipts, with allies, with your entire name. The red light went dark. The band swelled them to commercial. Diane squeezed his hand again. You did what you came to do, she whispered. Backstage felt suddenly too small. Denise reached him first, arms around him, a hold that said past and future at once. He breathed into her shoulder and let himself be someone's son again. Lila appeared with a smile that was equal parts pride and wariness. You were clear. You were careful, she said. We'll post the training audio. We're ready for the blowback. The blowback didn't wait. By the time Malik's earpiece was unclipped, his phone was vibrating. A push alert flashed. Eldenridge responds live. Fabricated claims. Audio taken out of context. He opened the statement, eyes racing. This evening's broadcast featured misleading allegations and doctored materials. No such training call exists in our admissions office. The reference documents are falsified or misinterpreted. We categorically deny that any employee ever used the terms cited to discriminate against an applicant. The university is exploring all legal avenues in response to this malicious defamation. A second alert followed. Worse. Eldenridge. We have reviewed our records and found no call from East Hollow High guidance regarding Mr. Johnson. Then a line that hollowed him out. We urge the public not to be deceived by a narrative built on lies. Denise read over his shoulder. The words splintered across the small screen like glass. "They're calling you a liar," she said. The tissue crumpled in her fist. The studio hallway seemed to tilt. Lila's phone rang in her hand. She listened, face tightening. "Their counsel just emailed our legal," she said, looking up at Malik. "They're doubling down." Malik stared at the statement's final sentence, the one meant to end the conversation. "This matter is closed." He felt something inside him answer, low and certain. "No, it isn't." The morning after the Senate hearing, the country's front pages carried the same image. Malik at the witness table, shoulders squared, eyes steady, a copy of the redacted logs beneath his fingertips. The headlines varied in tone, but not in verdict. Coded bias laid bare. The meritocracy myth. Perceived personality. A decade of denials. Cable news framed every hour with the same chyron. Eldenridge under fire. At East Hollow, Denise poured coffee she forgot to drink and watched the clips cycle. Commentators replayed the moment Senator Whitaker held up a stack of papers labeled Perceived Personality Alignment, each analyst lingering on the words as if they were a relic that had finally been pulled from a vault. Malik stood at the sink, gripping the counter, listening to voices speak about him like a case study, about Eldenridge like a metaphor. "This isn't just us anymore," Denise murmured. "They're not talking about a college. They're talking about a country." By noon, the narrative had migrated from anger to accountability. Editorial boards called for Eldenridge's leadership to answer under oath. An ethics nonprofit released a white paper connecting phrases like tone concerns and cultural tension to hiring and lending practices from decades prior, old vocabulary polished for a new gate. The parallels were uncomfortable. That was the point. Inside Eldenridge's exacting brick perimeter, quiet turned tactical. Advancement officers answered phones in hushed tones, as alumni donors called to pause or redirect gifts. A development VP forwarded a spreadsheet with the subject line "I unpacked," immediate 7 figures in rescinded pledges before lunch. A major donor wrote, "I will not bankroll a campus that hides prejudice behind algorithms." An email leaked within the hour. Screenshots hit Twitter. The numbers did more than shame. They scared. "Money moving," Ethan texted Malik, attaching a link to the spreadsheet. "That's leverage even the board can't spin." Across campus, students staged a teach-in on the quad. Faculty ringed around them with hand-lettered signs. "Transparency is academic rigor. Fit is not a dog whistle." A group of computer science professors announced they would audit any admissions algorithm, if given access. "If your metric is fair," one wrote in an open letter, "open the code." The Board of Trustees convened an emergency session in a wood-paneled room 6 floors above the PR war room. A crisis firm beamed in via video. Polite, efficient, chemically calm, their advice slid onto a deck. Acknowledge concerns without conceding liability. Announce independent review, center mission and values, and in smaller font, isolate outlier practices from core policy. "Translation," muttered a trustee alum of color, not bothering to mute. "Throw someone under the bus and call it a parade." All eyes turned to the head of the table, where President Leonard Armitage rested 2 fingers against his temple. He had led Eldenridge for 11 years. A scholar of Renaissance politics with a taste for slow, careful words. His biography read like legitimacy. Rhodes Scholar. 2 books translated into 4 languages. Capital campaigns exceeded by miles. He was good at decorum. Decorum, until today, had been enough. "We can absorb a week of bad press," Armitage said evenly. "What we cannot absorb is the erosion of trust in our process. We will announce an independent review by a respected third party. In parallel, we will temporarily suspend personality fit as a criterion pending that review." "Too little," said the alum trustee. "Too late. The review must be truly independent," another added, voice tight. "No hand-picked friends." A lawyer at the far end advised, "Every word on camera is discovery. Stay within the line of policy. No improvisation." Armitage nodded once. He was already scheduled for a network interview and a campus town hall that evening. The schedule left no room for error. The irony, error was what the public seemed to be waiting for. Back in their apartment, Denise and Malik watched a countdown clock tick toward the interview. The screen cut to a reporter standing at the campus gates. "President Armitage will address allegations within the hour," she said. In the meantime, donor backlash intensified. A prominent tech billionaire and Eldenridge alum has just frozen a $50 million pledge. "That's the unexpected twist," Ethan messaged. "Money is talking louder than statements." Think they listen now? Denise asked, not lifting her eyes from the TV. If they don't, they'll feel it, Malik said. At 6:03 p.m., the camera found Armitage seated opposite a primetime host in a tastefully austere studio. He looked exactly as his biography intended, measured, statesmanlike, a little tired. The host didn't waste time. Mr. President, is Eldridge discriminatory? No, Armitage said, calm and direct. Eldridge is not discriminatory. We are, however, flawed. Like every institution composed of human beings. We can be better. We will be better. The host held up a copy of the perceived personality alignment table. Is this yours? Armitage's eyes flicked down, then up. These are internal tools used to understand how an incoming class will cohere. They should never have been weaponized against any group. If they were interpreted that way, that is a serious failure. Interpreted, the host repeated. Mr. President, the logs show black students admitted at less than half the rate of white students with identical GPAs, with that phrase appearing again and again. How is that interpretation and not design? A half-second of quiet. It was small, but in crisis television, small silences are magnified. Armitage blinked once, then leaned a fraction forward. Context matters, he said. Our offices receive information from many sources. Transcripts, recommendations, interviews, and historically pre-read notes from schools. We utilize he stopped. A neuron firing one beat too late, a contextual alignment tool to aggregate those inputs. The host pounced. Name it. Armitage hesitated. The lawyer's warning throbbed behind his eyes. Across the bottom of the screen, a producer cued a graphic. What is the tool? After a breath he couldn't take back, Armitage said. It's colloquially referred to as the Harmony Index. An intake of breath rippled across the studio. The word hit Twitter like a struck match. Harmony Index? Screenshots of archived job postings surfaced, looking for data analysts to support campus climate modeling. The phrase harmony took on the metallic sheen of a euphemism, once you knew what it measured. The host kept her face still. Mr. President, your office earlier denied the existence of any training call instructing staff to avoid references to race and use terms like attitude concerns. We aired authenticated audio to the contrary. Does the Harmony Index incorporate guidance from such calls? We do not train anyone to discriminate, Armitage said. Words clipped. We train staff to speak consistently about mission and values. So the call exists, the host pressed. We have regular alignment calls, he replied, and saw at once too late how the sentence sounded outside the boardroom. Consistency to one ear, collusion to another. The host pivoted to donations. Major alumni are halting gifts. Professors are offering to audit your code. Will you turn the Harmony Index over to independent reviewers? Another beat. Armitage chose what sounded like transparency that could still be lawyered. We will cooperate fully with any legitimate inquiry. Is that a yes? She asked. It is a commitment, he said, to a process worthy of a university. The interview ended with a rehearsed flourish. Remorse without admission, openness without specificity. On social media, the only phrase that stuck was Harmony Index. Within minutes, the school paper ran a timeline tying Harmony to campus protests from 2015, when student activists demanded curricular reform and the administration responded by promising to protect community cohesion. The pivot in language was now part of a pattern anyone could scroll. Power tables are turning, Ethan texted. He named it. You can't unname. At 8 p.m., Eldridge streamed a campus town hall. The auditorium swelled with students and faculty, alumni chiming in via live chat, moderators flanked by security. Armitage took the stage to a storm of contradictory sounds. Boos, applause, a single sustained chant of "Open the code" that pulsed until the moderator raised both hands. We hear your concerns, Armitage began. We will commission an independent review led by a retired federal judge. We are suspending personality fit metrics immediately. We will meet with student leaders. A hand shot up in the faculty section. It was Professor Ilana Weiss from computer science. Hair pulled into a quick knot, voice hard as a scalpel. Who designed the Harmony Index? Who fed it? And did your office ever ask counselors to call concerns in verbally to avoid a traceable record? A murmur rippled like wind through tall grass. The moderator tried to steer, but Weiss kept going. We have logs showing pre-read calls from high schools being annotated into applicant files. Verbal notes to avoid audit, appears verbatim in a 2018 email header from your VP of Enrollment. If you're serious about transparency, state here and now that you will preserve all records and deliver the index, the training materials, and the call transcripts to the Senate committee. Denise and Malik watched the stream on their couch, the glow painting their faces blue-white. Malik's foot tapped, then stilled. Armitage's jaw flexed. "We will comply with lawful requests," he said. "We do not purge records to avoid accountability." From somewhere in the back, a student called, "Then why did my dean tell us on Zoom last year that emails create discoverable trails and we should keep sensitive feedback to phone?" The moderator banged for order. A trustee strode on stage to whisper in Armitage's ear. The microphones picked up nothing, but the optics were loud. A sophomore at the mic recounted how a black friend with a 4.1 had been told she was too assertive in alumni interviews. A first-gen Latina senior described being urged to frame her story with gratitude, rather than grievance. A faculty member listed phrases from the logs that mapped one-to-one with the call's coaching language. To each, Armitage offered the same bomb: "We will review. We will do better." The chat scrolled faster than the moderators could slow it. "Open the code. Harmony index. Audit everything." In that flood, one comment climbed to the top, upvoted by hundreds in minutes. It was from a handle no one recognized, but the phrasing had the clipped exactness of someone who knew their way around policy. Harmony Index introduced 2016, calibrated after campus protests. We called it Quiet Campus in the deck. Check the shared drive, or EAA admissions. Risk, HIV2 final. The auditorium buzzed. Phones lit like bioluminescent fish. The moderator sputtered a warning about unauthenticated claims, but half the room was already typing, archiving, geocaching the clue before anyone with admin privileges could move. Armitage's face didn't change, but the tendons in his neck did. He adjusted his notes, glanced stage left at counsel, then leaned toward the mic. It was the smallest of movements, the kind crisis managers miss because they're watching for storm, not static. His voice, steady for an hour, thinned by a single degree. "Let me be perfectly clear," he said. "There has never been an attempt by this administration to destroy records related to admissions deliberations. The Harmony materials are archived in accordance with retention policy, and as I said, He paused, pinched the bridge of his nose, and in that microsecond the room exhaled, believing the line had simply snagged. Then he lowered his hand and added, almost offhand, almost weary, almost as if explaining a harmless technicality to a room that would not understand. "And we sunset the Harmony backups on the shared drive last fiscal year when we migrated sensitive files to the off-network environment, per counsel's guidance." The auditorium didn't gasp so much as go quiet in a way that sound engineers call dead air, and lawyers call an admission. On the stream, the chat stopped spinning for a heartbeat, then exploded. Denise's hand found Malik's forearm. "Did he just..." she began. "He did," Malik breathed. On stage, a trustee lurched forward, but Armitage had already realized what he'd said. He swallowed, regrouped, reached for a phrase that could unsay a thing that could not be unsaid. To be clear, sunset refers to scheduled archiving. No destruction of records occurred. The off-network environment is more secure. All relevant material remains preserved. Professor Weiss leaned into her mic, eyes sharp. "Mr. President, our university's retention policy prohibits altering locations of records under inquiry without notice. Sunsetting during the period covered by Senator Whitaker's logs would violate that policy." A dozen hands shot up. 100 phones captured. 1,000 viewers clipped the 15 seconds between sunset the Harmony backups and more secure. The board's counsel stepped to the podium, voice suddenly urgent. "We will have no further comment tonight." Microphones cut. The live stream ended in a clatter of cutaway graphics. But the line had already detached from the stage and gone everywhere at once. Within minutes, Ethan tweeted, "Hot mic? Armitage acknowledges sunsetting Harmony backups last fiscal year. Off-network environment," counsel advised. Subpoenas inbound. National outlets picked it up. Lawyers on panels used the phrase potential spoliation. The word cover-up crawled across the bottom third of screens, like a verdict returning from a jury box. Malik stared at the frozen frame of Armitage mid-syllable, eyes a fraction too wide for the mask of control. The power tables had tipped. They weren't negotiating optics anymore. They were staring at the seam of a long-sewn curtain, finally torn. And somewhere, on a server no longer called a shared drive, The files that built a decade of rejections waited for a subpoena or for a keystroke. The announcement didn't come through breaking news or a press release. It came in the form of a single email Malik sent late at night, a message that carried the weight of months of struggle, humiliation, and resilience. By morning, the news was everywhere. Malik Johnson chooses Riverton University over Eldonridge. The headline trended for hours, dissected and debated by journalists, educators, and strangers who felt as though they had been part of the journey. The decision struck like a verdict. The boy who exposed systemic bias had chosen a place that stood beside him, not the one that had tried to bury him. At Riverton, faculty celebrated the news. Students painted murals of Malik on campus walls before he even arrived. The robotics lab director posted, "We're not just welcoming a student. We're welcoming a truth teller." Other universities released statements of support, a cascade of institutions realizing that Malik's decision was not simply about enrollment. It was about ethics. At Eldonridge, silence fell heavier than stone. Their belated offer, gilded with apology, had been publicly spurned. Donations continued to stall. Commentators framed Malik's decision as an indictment that no audit or resignation could soften. "He chose trust over prestige," one columnist wrote, and in doing so, he shifted the axis of what power means in education. For Malik, the choice was less about headlines and more about survival. When Riverton's acceptance letter came with genuine words of support, when their faculty called him by name and not by category, he felt something Eldonridge had never given him: belonging. On the morning Riverton's president welcomed him in a live-streamed address, Malik stood beside Denise in their modest living room. She gripped his hand as though holding the past steady while he walked into the future. "You did it," she whispered, but Malik shook his head gently. "We did it," he wanted to say, because every step had been carved by her double shifts, her unwavering prayers, her refusal to let him carry the burden alone. As summer turned to fall, Malik's story began appearing in places he never expected. Education journals analyzed the coded language of personality fit using Eldonridge's scandal as Exhibit A. Civil rights groups cited his testimony in their policy briefs. High school counselors printed out his Senate quote, "Merit isn't a favor to be granted, it's the truth of what we already earned," and taped it to their office doors. Even classrooms far from East Hollow began teaching his case. A professor of American Studies at a Midwestern college introduced a new course, Bias and the Myth of Meritocracy. The syllabus opened with Malik's name. "Your fight is going to outlive you," Ethan Morales told him over coffee one afternoon, months after the storm. Ethan's notebook was already full of drafts for a book he hoped to publish. That's the thing about stories that force a nation to look in the mirror. They stop belonging to the teller. Malik sipped his drink and gave a small, weary smile. "I didn't ask to be a mirror." "No one ever does," Ethan said. "But some mirrors don't crack under the weight. You didn't." Denise, meanwhile, tried to stitch herself back together. The nights of fear still lingered. The way sirens or sudden knocks rattled her body before her mind could catch up. But with each passing week, she began to reclaim pieces of herself. She cooked again without checking the locks twice. She prayed without bargaining for Malik's safety in every sentence. Watching her son prepare for Riverton's move-in, she felt pride sharpened by ache. "I wanted you safe," she admitted one evening. "But you chose something braver than safe. You chose right." Malik hugged her quietly. No cameras, no chance, just a mother and a son, finally exhaling in the space between battles. The first day at Riverton felt like stepping onto a campus that had already made room for him before he arrived. A banner stretched across the student center, reading, "Welcome Malik Johnson," and the class of two. But when he walked into the robotics lab, the welcome was quieter. Tools spread across tables, gears humming, students focused on projects but pausing long enough to nod, smile, and gesture for him to join. Here, he wasn't the scandal. He was the student. It was in that lab, soldering alongside peers who treated him as an equal, that Malik realized the true victory wasn't the apology wrung from Eldonridge, or the resignation of its president. It was this moment, to be seen without explanation, to be valued without condition. Nationally, the reforms at Eldonridge continued. The audit revealed patterns so entrenched that even administrators could not deny them. The Harmony Index was dissected in hearings, the word itself entering the lexicon as shorthand for coded exclusion. Other universities preemptively ended similar fit policies, eager to avoid the same reckoning. But Malik remained wary of applause. Reforms happen when cameras are on, he told Ethan once. The question is what happens when they're off. His caution proved prophetic. Months later, another headline surfaced. A black student at a different elite university denied entry to a dorm by campus security. The video wasn't as viral as Malik's case, but the story echoed too closely to ignore. Malik read it in his dorm room at Riverton, jaw tight. The struggle wasn't over. His story wasn't singular. It was part of a pattern still unfolding. In classrooms, Malik excelled, but the scars were there. He bristled when professors used phrases like holistic evaluation, flinched when asked to speak for diverse perspectives. The wounds were invisible but heavy, shadows that followed him between lectures and lab. Denise noticed when he called home. "You sound tired," she'd say. "I'm just working," he'd reply. But they both knew it wasn't only the workload, it was the burden of being both student and symbol. One night, Riverton hosted a lecture titled Reckoning with Admissions Bias, the Johnson Case. Malik sat in the back, hood pulled low. The speaker read from articles and quotes, his quotes and concluded with the line, "What they rejected was never Malik Johnson's brilliance. What they rejected was their own humanity." The audience applauded. Malik sat still, throat tight. Hearing his life distilled into a sentence that would echo in classrooms for years left him hollow and proud all at once. Later, walking back to his dorm under the autumn leaves, he whispered the words to himself, not as a headline but as a truth he had earned. They hadn't failed him. They had failed themselves. By spring, Malik was no longer just a freshman. He was a case study, a name in policy debates, an example cited by activists and educators alike. But in the quiet corners of campus, he was also something else, a young man soldering wires, writing code, laughing with friends in the dining hall. It was this balance, symbol and student, that carried him forward. The story of Malik Johnson was retold in documentaries, in op-eds, in classrooms where students debated fairness and privilege. But in East Hollow, in the modest home where Denise still lived, the story was simpler. It was a mother who worked double shifts, and a son who refused to stay silent. On his last night home before returning to Riverton for his sophomore year, Malik sat at the kitchen table where it had all begun. The rejection letter, the trembling email, the decision that shifted the ground beneath them. Denise placed a fresh cup of tea in front of him, just as she had that first night. "Do you ever think about how it started?" she asked softly. Malik looked at the table, at the faint scratch where the envelope opener had once slipped. He thought of the weight of the paper, the coldness of the words, the fury that had followed. "Every day," he admitted. She reached for his hand, squeezing gently. "And now?" He breathed deeply, a steadier breath than months before. "Now I think rejection was never the end. It was the beginning." The cameras, the hearings, the protests, they would all fade into archives and memory. But the question Malik left behind did not fade. It haunted boardrooms and classrooms alike, a question that every institution, every leader, and every student had to face. If Malik Johnson had not spoken, if he had accepted silence, how many others would still be unseen? And the closing narration of his story, carried by voices across the nation, crystallized it. What they rejected was never Malik's brilliance. It was their own humanity. Malik's refusal to stay silent turned one rejection into a revolution. But how many Maliks are still being silenced today? If Malik's story moved you, remember his fight is not his alone. Every voice raised makes silence weaker. Every share brings hidden truths to light. Stand with him. Stand with justice. Type yes if you believe no dream should be denied by prejudice, and subscribe if this broke your heart. The viral clip of the freshman on the quad would not stop playing. It looped on every feed, the guard's outstretched arm, a metronome of dismissal. By Sunday night, Eldon Ridge's gates were choked with cardboard and chant. Monday morning, the university blinked. They called it a comprehensive response. Cameras packed the auditorium where the board chair stood beside President Armitage, a phalanx of deans just behind. The chair spoke first, voice smoothed by lawyers. "We failed members of our community," she said, the words landing like stones dropped in deep water. "We own that failure." Armitage read from a teleprompter that did not quite disguise the tremor in his jaw. "Effective immediately," he announced, "we are dismantling the Harmony Index and suspending all personality fit metrics. A fully independent review, led by retired Judge Marisol Kent, will audit a decade of admissions practices, training materials and communications. We will preserve all records. We will publish anonymized data. We will institute mandatory anti-bias training. We will create an equity ombuds office with subpoena-like authority to inspect internal processes. And to the young man stopped on our quad, we are sorry. To Malik Johnson and to every student who felt unseen, we are sorry. Applause broke politely, then wavered. Students outside did not cheer. They listened, then held up signs that read, "Words are not change." In the chat window of the live stream, the comments stacked. Open the code. Publish everything. Don't sunset truth. Denise watched from the couch, a hand pressed to her sternum, as if to keep her heart from bolting. They said sorry, she murmured, and in her voice was relief braided with rage. They had to say it out loud. Malik stared at the screen. He heard the apology and the architecture behind it. The committees, the council, the guarded verbs. They're admitting harm, he said. They're not admitting intent. By afternoon, the comprehensive response widened. Eldenridge posted a page titled Reforms and Commitments. It promised to end legacy preference for a year pending review, to convene a student-faculty oversight council, to fund scholarships for students impacted by historical inequities in evaluation. The PR copy wore urgency like borrowed clothes. Then the part no one expected, a letter to Malik. It arrived via email and courier, a crisp envelope on heavy stock. Mr. Johnson, it began, in light of new information and our administrative review, we are pleased to offer you admission to Eldenridge University with immediate effect, including a full scholarship and research stipend. We would also value your participation on our new advisory council on admissions equity. The university asked for an answer within 2 weeks. The letter was signed in fountain blue by Leonard Armitage. Denise read it twice, then looked up, eyes shining with a hope she'd trained herself to distrust. They're offering you everything they took. Malik traced the embossed crest with his thumb. In another universe, the one where the letter had come first, he would have shouted, danced, called Noah and Zara, texted Coach Hargrove, run down the block. In this universe, his chest felt hollow, the way a bell rings empty after being struck too hard. Feels like a backdated receipt, he said softly, like they want my presence to close their case. Ethan called within the hour. They're pivoting to restoration. He said, it's smart. It makes headlines softer. But remember, your acceptance doesn't fix the pattern. Choosing you now does not retroactively absolve what they did then. As if the universe wanted balance, other offers began arriving. Some were emails, warm and immediate. Others were calls from deans who introduced themselves by first name, then apologized for how Malik had been treated by a place that wasn't theirs. Riverton University came first, an elite campus that had publicly backed Malik the night of his TV interview. We won't pretend to atone for someone else, their admissions dean said, but we'd be honored to have you. Full scholarship, research placement in our robotics lab, and immediate mentorship. Northlake wrote next, then Fairmount, then an HBCU whose president called from her office after hours. We don't need you to make us look better, she told him. We want you to feel at home. Malik set the phone down after each call, his head buzzing. The kitchen table was suddenly a map of possibility. Brochures fanned like cards, financial packages printed and clipped, sticky notes marking deadlines. Denise stood over the table with her arms folded, a general surveying a battlefield. We asked for truth, she said. Now truth is asking, where do you want to build your life? Malik could not say Eldenridge. When he pictured the campus now, it wasn't the library's vaulted hush he saw. It was the guard's hand on the freshman's path, and the word harmony turning to ash in his mouth. He could feel the bruise of weeks, threats in his inbox, strangers on the sidewalk saying his name like a dare, his mother flinching at sudden knocks. You can choose safety, Denise said, barely above a whisper. After all this, you've earned it. What's safe? He asked, genuinely. A place that says the right words, or a place that means them. He visited campuses when he could, often under the quiet protection of admissions staff who understood the spectacle his presence could invite. At Riverton, the robotics lab smelled like solder and fresh coffee, and a senior talked him through a project without once explaining basic concepts he already knew. At the HBCU, he toured a residence hall with a black RA who said, "We'll let you be brilliant and loud," and the words lodged in his ribs like medicine. In between, he met with Clara Whitman at a park bench, under a thin winter sun. She looked less haunted than before, though still wary. They will use you if you let them, she warned gently. What you decide is your politics and your peace. My mother wants both for me, he said. She's right to want it, Clara replied. The choice won't be clean. That's the trap of public victories. They don't feel like winning where it matters most. Night after night, Malik woke at 3 to the old clock's rasp. In the half-dark, he could still hear the Senate room's hum, the TV studio's click, the town hall's sudden hush when Armitage said sunset. He imagined opening his dorm door next fall and finding not a calendar and a whiteboard, but a camera and a question. Would he ever enter a room as a student, and not as a controversy? Denise saw it taking shape in him, the vigilance that stays after a storm. She carried her own, a car idled too long outside, and she stood by the curtains, counting. A package arrived, and she stayed back until Malik shook it. When she prayed at night, her prayers were less about victory than about breath. The apology tour continued. Eldenridge suspended the security guard from the video and promised retraining. Paid student workers drafted a new policy on campus stops. The board announced an interim leadership committee. 3 trustees resigned. Then, another human headline. Leonard Armitage tendered his resignation to allow the institution to heal, effective at semester's end. Resignations are symbolic, Ethan texted. The audit is substance. Watch the audit. Malik did. Judge Kent's team posted a timetable and a portal for submissions. In the comments under the announcement, alumni argued over civility and courage. A sophomore wrote, "It shouldn't take a scandal to be seen." An older alum replied, "It always has." The thread read like a family fight that had gone on for generations. Some of the hate ebbed. Some of it didn't. An envelope with no return address arrived with one sheet inside. No words, just a cutout of the word liar pasted crooked. Denise put it in a plastic sleeve and handed it to a pro bono lawyer who had joined their cause. If they wanted to make me quiet, they should have met me before I had a child, she told him. Nothing scares louder than love. On a gray afternoon, Malik walked past East Hollow's gym and heard the debate team rehearsing. He paused at the door. Zara spotted him and waved him in, the room lighting with cheers. "We're building next year's case on admissions language," she said, eyes bright. "You made a new canon." He smiled, then felt a tug of something complicated, a longing for ordinary. He sat for a round, gave notes, and left before nostalgia could ache. That night, a courier knocked again. Another envelope, embossed, but not Eldenridge blue. Riverton's crest, spare and modern, gleamed in the lamp's pool. He opened it. A single sheet, handwritten by the robotics chair. "We watched you tell the truth when it cost you. That's what we build with here. Truth and wiring and stubborn patience. If you choose us, know that your voice won't be an accessory. It will be welcome." Denise read the note over his shoulder and closed her eyes. "That sounds like home," she said. He exhaled slowly. "Maybe." Late that same night, an email from Eldenridge landed with the subject line "Final Deadline Reminder." It recited the scholarship, the advisory council, the language of amended welcome. It ended with a sentence that made his scalp prickle. "We hope you will allow us to be part of your healing." He stared at it until the words lost edges. Healing, like something a hospital offers with a wristband and a bill. Healing, like it could be dispensed by the same hand that held the stamp. Denise poured tea and said nothing. Her capacity for silence had always been a kind of wisdom. Malik opened 2 tabs. In one, Eldenridge's portal glowed with a green button, "Accept offer." In the other, a different portal. Riverton sat with a field for enrollment confirmation. He thought of the freshmen on the quad, of Clara's thin smile, of Ms. Garrison's silence, of Ms. Levin's emails, of Ms. Klein's anonymous courage, of Ethan's late-night calls, of Pastor Reed's hand on his shoulder, of Denise's sleepless dawns. He thought of 12-year-old him at the kitchen table bending wire into a first robot, and believing that if you built something true enough, it would stand on its own legs. His fingers hovered. "Whatever you choose," Denise said quietly. "Let it be a decision, not a reaction." He nodded, swallowed, and typed. One sentence, then another. He read them twice. He clicked send on an email addressed to President Armitage's office, his counselor, and the board's inbox. Then, with a steadier breath than he expected, he clicked submit on a different screen. Watching a spinning circle confirmed the future he had chosen. The phone buzzed almost immediately. Ethan, then Zara, then an unknown number lighting all at once. Malik didn't answer. He closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair, eyes on the ceiling crack that had watched him grow up. In the quiet that followed, Denise reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You did it," she said. He nodded, chest pounding, grief and relief braided until he couldn't tell them apart. Outside, sirens Dopplered past, and somewhere, on a campus he had once imagined as destiny, lights flickered in an empty administrative suite. The statements were already drafting. The blogs were already typing. The headlines would run by morning. But before any of that, in a small kitchen that had held so many storms, Malik allowed himself one unguarded, ordinary breath. The phrase "sunset the harmony backups" was replayed across every platform by morning. News anchors dissected it. Legal analysts debated whether Armitage's words constituted spoliation. Students edited it into TikToks with captions like "translation," "cover-up." Protesters painted the words on cardboard signs and marched them to the gates of Eldenridge. What had been outrage turned into something sharper. Public patience snapped. If the Senate hearing had been a turning point, Armitage's slip was the breaking point. In East Hollow, the Johnsons could feel the country pressing against their front door. Denise woke to dozens of new voicemails. Some were prayers, thanking her for raising a son with courage. Others were venom. "You people ruin everything," one said. "Stay in your lane." She deleted it quickly. But Malik had already heard enough from the tone. On the front lawn, two neighbors left a bouquet with a note tucked inside. For Malik, the fighter our kids needed. Yet that same afternoon, a brick was hurled at their mailbox. It missed, shattering on the pavement, but the message was clear. Support and hate were arriving in equal measure. Denise swept up the shards herself, her hands trembling. "Praise I can handle," she whispered. "But the threats? They don't stop when the cameras go off." Malik wanted to argue, to say that what they were doing mattered too much to stop. But he saw the way her shoulders curled inward, the way she double-checked the locks now, and he swallowed his words. At school, Malik's return was no reprieve. Some classmates greeted him with hugs, selfies, and wide-eyed congratulations, whispering, "You're famous." Others averted their eyes or muttered under their breath. One boy muttered just loud enough for Malik to hear, "Yeah, he's famous for crying racism." Malik ignored it, but the words followed him through the halls. Fame didn't feel like victory. Fame felt like exposure. That evening, Ethan called. "It's chaos here. Trustees are in meltdown. Half the faculty want Armitage gone. Half the alumni are demanding investigations. But Malik, this is the moment. They can't put the genie back." Malik rubbed his eyes. "What if the genie gets us killed before it changes anything?" There was silence on the line. Ethan finally said, "Justice comes with weight. But you don't have to carry it alone." Denise was unraveling in ways she tried to hide. At work, she triple-checked medication charts, fearful her distracted mind might slip. At home, she left lights on in every room, unwilling to let darkness creep in. When Malik stayed late at the library, she called him 3 times just to hear his voice. One night, she broke. Malik came home to find her at the kitchen table, head bowed in her hands. "They paint you as brave on TV," she said through tears. "But they don't show me counting the hours you're gone, wondering if some angry stranger decides to make you an example." He sat beside her, wrapping his arms around her shoulders. "Mom, I'm still here." She pressed her forehead against his chest, shaking. For how long? The question clawed at Malik, because for the first time he didn't know the answer. The protests swelled. In Washington, thousands marched with signs bearing Malik's photo. At Eldenridge, students occupied the admissions building, live-streaming chants that pulsed across the internet. At state houses, lawmakers began drafting resolutions, calling for systemic reforms beyond one campus. But with the movement came backlash. Conservative pundits framed Malik as a poster child for grievance culture. Online forums flooded with conspiracy theories claiming the documents were forgeries. And in Malik's inbox, a message appeared that chilled him. "We know where you live." Denise printed the email and took it to the police. The officer skimmed it, sighed, and said, "We'll file it." Could be a troll. Could be nothing. Denise snapped. "Nothing? It's my son's life." "That's not nothing." The officer only repeated, "We'll file it." She walked out, gripping the paper like it was evidence of how little protection the world offered them. Malik tried to keep focus. Each day, more young people reached out, sharing their own rejection stories, coded notes, subtle humiliations. Some were from Eldenridge, others from rival schools, all threads in the same tapestry. A girl from Chicago wrote, They told me my essay was too political, but it was about losing my brother to gun violence. How is my truth too political? A boy from Atlanta confessed. They said I came across as angry in my interview. I wasn't angry. I was nervous. Malik read each message, sometimes until his vision blurred. The stories crushed him, yet they also proved this wasn't his fight alone. Meanwhile, national coverage spiraled. Nightly news aired footage of protests set to solemn piano chords. Editorialists argued over whether elite education was redeemable or inherently rigged. At a rally in Boston, a senator thundered, "If the doors are built to keep our children out, we will tear down the hinges." Malik and Denise watched from their couch, both silent. Denise finally whispered, "They're making you a symbol, but a symbol can't sleep. A symbol can't hide." Malik looked at her, heavy with exhaustion. "I don't want to be a symbol. I just wanted to be a student." The breaking point arrived not with words but with images. Late one Friday night, Malik's phone buzzed with a notification. New viral video, Eldridge student confrontation. He clicked. A screen filled with shaky phone footage. A young black freshman walked across the quad, wearing a hoodie, earbuds in. A white security guard stopped him, blocking his path. The student pulled out his ID, clearly visible to the camera. "I live here," he said, voice tight. The guard shook his head. "You don't fit the description. Show me again." "I just showed you," the boy insisted, his hands trembling. "This is my dorm. That's my room right there."
The guard's radio crackled. He muttered into it, then ordered, "Step aside until we confirm."
The boy's eyes flicked to the person recording. "They won't let me go to my own dorm," he said, voice breaking, "because of how I look." The video ended with the guard reaching for the boy's arm, as others shouted, "We're recording." By morning it had millions of views. Hashtags like Jine, While Black 8, Eldridge trended. Commenters connected it instantly to Malik's story. Proof that discrimination wasn't buried in files. It walked the campus in daylight. Malik sat frozen at the kitchen table, phone still in his hand. Denise read over his shoulder, her breath sharp. "They'll spin it," she said bitterly. "They'll say protocol. They'll say safety. But it's the same script over and over." Malik stared at the boy's terrified face in the paused frame. It was like looking in a mirror, another life where he'd made it onto campus only to be told he didn't belong. His jaw set. They can't bury this one, not with cameras everywhere. But even as he said it, he felt the danger sharpen. If the system couldn't silence him with rejections, and couldn't outlast him with denials, what would it try next? The answer lay in the boy's eyes on the screen, eyes that showed fear, exhaustion, and a question no one should have to ask. Will I ever be safe here? And Malik realized, neither would he.